Well, it's nearly 10 o'clock Eastern time, and the polls are about to close in Iowa. There's a big state. Montana, Nevada, and Utah. And the race we're all watching here is the Senate race in Iowa between Joni Ernst, who made her name with that TV ad about castrating hogs, and Bruce Braley, who is referred to by the Clintons as Bruce Bailey, which didn't help him at all. Who also made the mistake of referring to the ranking or the senior senator from the state as some farmer from Iowa who doesn't deserve to be on the Judiciary Committee, which certainly didn't help anybody out there.
Which isn't a nice insult anytime, especially if you are running for statewide office in Iowa. In terms of the 10 o'clock poll closings, this is what we've got so far. NBC News projects that the winner in the Montana Senate race is Steve Daines, Republican Congressman Steve Daines. This is a Republican pickup. This was the Max Baucus Democratic-held Senate seat before now. In the Iowa Senate race, the aforementioned Bruce Braley-Joni Ernst race, the NBC projection in this is that it is too early to call. Bruce Braley versus Joni Ernst. All eyes on that race right now in Iowa. In terms of other races that were polls closed earlier tonight, but where we still don't have a definitive result, in North Carolina, it is too close to call between Republican Tom Tillis and Democratic incumbent Kay Hagan. In Kansas, the Senate race there, Pat Roberts, the Republican incumbent, trying to hold on. At this point, that is a too close to call characterization by NBC News. In the Virginia Senate race, this is fascinating. 86% of the vote in between Republican Ed Gillespie and Democratic incumbent Mark Warner. This one is still described as too close to call, less than 20,000 votes between them. In the Georgia Senate race, this is Michelle Nunn, the Democrat, and David Perdue, the Republican, just over half the vote in. That one's too early to call in Georgia. In the Colorado Senate race right now, Cory Gardner versus Democratic incumbent Mark Udall. Too early to call with just under 2/3 of the vote in. In New Mexico, the Senate race there, Tom Udall, the Democratic incumbent, against Republican Alan Way, about 1/4 of the vote in. That's too early to call. And in Louisiana, we're going to be going to, this is Mary Landrieu trying to hold on to her incumbent Senate seat in Louisiana. We're going to be going to a runoff in Louisiana, Mary Landrieu versus Bill Cassidy. Rob Maness, the Republican, one of 8 people on the ballot there, siphoning enough votes that nobody's able to get to 50%. There will be a December runoff in Louisiana. In terms of the overall Senate picture, the Senate pickups thus far are in Arkansas, where Mark Pryor lost his seat, Montana, where the Max Baucus Senate seat went Republican, South Dakota, where the Tim Johnson Senate seat went Republican, and in West Virginia, where the Rockefeller Senate seat has gone to Shelley Moore Capito. At the Senate this hour, in terms of the balance of power, there are 45 Republican Senate seats in Washington, 40 Democratic seats, plus 2 independents who in the past have caucused with the Democratic Party, Angus King of Maine and Bernie Sanders of Vermont. We've still got 13 races that are as yet undecided. In terms of governors, we've just had a poll closing in Iowa. Republican incumbent Governor Terry Branstad of Iowa has been reelected. That's the NBC News projection for the Iowa governor's race. And in Nevada, the Republican incumbent there, Brian Sandoval, very popular Republican incumbent. NBC News also projects that in Nevada, Brian Sandoval has been reelected. In terms of governor's races that closed earlier tonight, where we still don't have an answer, the big one, of course, Florida, Rick Scott versus Charlie Crist. This one is too close to call. You can see how much of the vote is in there, but NBC News is not projecting a winner in the Florida governor's race at this point. The Illinois governor's race, this one is also described as too close to call between Democratic incumbent Pat Quinn and Republican Bruce Rauner, his challenger. In the Massachusetts governor's race, it's an open seat. Deval Patrick stepping down. Martha Coakley, the Democrat who wants to succeed him, versus Charlie Baker, the Republican. That one is too close to call in Massachusetts, just under 60% of the vote in. The Massachusetts three-way governor's race, Paul LePage, the Republican incumbent, Maine governor's race, Elliot Cutler's the independent facing off against Paul LePage there. Different Democrat this time around from 2010, Mike Michaud. That one in Maine, that three-way governor's race is too close to call. Connecticut governor's race, Dan Malloy, the Democratic incumbent, versus Tom Foley, his Republican challenger. Look at the difference in votes there. 400 some odd votes between these two candidates. Too close to call, with just about 1/4 of the vote in Connecticut. In Wisconsin, Republican incumbent Scott Walker facing off against Democratic challenger Mary Burke. That one is too close to call. In Wisconsin, only about 1 in 6 votes are in there. Kansas governor's race, Republican incumbent conservative Sam Brownback. It's too close to call between him and his Democratic challenger Paul Davis. In the Georgia governor's race, Nathan Deal, the Republican incumbent, too early to call in his race against the Democratic challenger Jason Carter, who's the grandson of the former President Jimmy Carter. The Colorado governor's race, too early to call. Bob Beaupre, the Republican, trying to take John Hickenlooper's gubernatorial seat away from him. Too early to call in Colorado. And the last governor's race to talk about right now, Michigan governor's race, too early to call between the Republican incumbent Rick Snyder and his Democratic challenger Mark Schauer. Wow.
Well, you know, we're sitting here now. We've been here 4 hours. And yet the
Feels
only
like
race...
5 minutes.
No, it's joyous.
Yes.
It's joyous.
Yeah.
But the only thing we've decided is tonight, officially, is what we pretty much could have predicted a month ago. We're waiting tonight. This is a good time to order pizza if you're at home right now. Or even have a cup of real coffee, because this is going to go on for 4 or 5 hours. What we're looking for later tonight is to find out who actually won these races. We knew there was going to be 3 very tough races for the Dems, including, well, 4 if you include Arkansas. That's West Virginia, Montana, and South Dakota. Though nobody thought the Democrats, now that it's over, I don't mind depressing anybody by saying nobody thought there were going to be changes that weren't going to happen. And, of course, Pennsylvania, Tom Corbett was on his way out months ago, if not a couple of years ago. So we're waiting now for the real shank of the evening. The good stuff is coming. We're going to find out whether there really is going to be the upset of the year in Virginia. We're going to find out where it's going in Iowa, where it's going to go in Colorado. We're going to find out, and this is the one that's really pesky, North Carolina, finding out where that's going to go. Because it's one the Democrats, there's no other way they're going to win this thing tonight if they don't win North Carolina. They got to win that baby. And I think Kay Hagan did one hell of a job in that race. She got a lot of support from, you know, the Reverend Barber and the Marl Monday thing.
Mondays, yeah.
There was a lot of good, but she ran a perfect campaign. She pivoted off the bad issues onto the strong issues. She made Tom Tillis the issue. You can't be a better pal than she was this year. So if she can't win, they're not going to be able to call any victories tonight. But I still think it's possible. But I'll tell you, Virginia is so fascinating. No one would have said a few months ago that Mark Warner had anything to worry about.
When Ed Gillespie stopped running TV ads not that long ago, I was like, oh, Ed Gillespie is very bright. He's taking down his TV
When the
ads.
National Party left him, this is 3 successive Virginia races now. The McAuliffe race, which came out much closer than anyone anticipated.
True.
The Cantor primary, which surprised everyone. And now tonight, I mean, right now we're looking, as the returns come in, we're looking at it's possible that Gillespie loses by a narrow margin than Scott Brown in New Hampshire, which was like the marquee race.
There's Steve Karnacki.
Can you tell us about what we know in the Virginia Senate race?
Yeah, this is a crisis situation for Democrats right now. They need, and it comes down, this is a very dramatic election return process playing out now in Virginia. Look at this. Now, he has closed, since I've been standing here, Mark Warner, the Democrat, has closed this to about 7,000 votes. But let's look. This is the story. It has all come down, really, to one county in Virginia. We talked about this earlier tonight. Fairfax County always comes in very late. 1 million people, biggest county in Virginia. It's a Democratic county. Let's look what's going on in Fairfax County. And you can see here, Mark Warner right now leading by close to 40,000 votes, about 70% in. So the issue here for Warner is, can he drive up? Can he get enough votes out of Fairfax for what's left there to overtake Gillespie? And then the other issue would be, if you look back on the map, there are still scattered precincts around the state that haven't reported yet. I'm looking at it. I saw, this is as of about 10 minutes ago, I was looking in Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach, a Republican area. There were still some outstanding votes there, so Gillespie could pick up some there. I couldn't see what the pattern was in the rest of the state, but really this is about Fairfax County. And really, to underscore this, we weren't talking a few weeks ago, a few months ago about this being a close race. We weren't talking a few hours ago about this being a close race. Any scenario that we put out there tonight about the Democrats keeping the Senate, any scenario we've been putting out there about the Democrats keeping the Senate, just assumes they're going to keep Virginia. So right now, in Fairfax County, in the next few minutes, Mark Warner must overtake Ed Gillespie and win this race to keep the Democrats going and to have a chance to preserve the Senate.
Steve, I'm sorry for being obtuse on this. How much do we have from Fairfax County already? Anything?
Yeah, no, it looks like about 70% is in. You can't tell exactly how much is left, but at the current rate, when you have a 7,000 vote lead statewide right now for Gillespie, at the current rate, if Warner gets that same percentage for what's left, he would overtake him. As I said, the only issue then is there are other outstanding precincts in the state. There aren't many of them, but it's not entirely clear what the pattern is there. But right now, basically, he needs to continue getting a big margin out of Fairfax in what's left there. We've seen this before. When Jim Webb beat George Allen in 2006 in Virginia, it's the same thing. It was very late at night. He trailed all night because it takes so long, I don't know why, to get the vote in Fairfax. He caught him at the wire by about 6,000 votes. It looks like that's going to happen. That could happen again. again here. But again, this is one of those, this was just not on anybody's radar. If you'd asked anybody coming in tonight, they said Warner's going to win this thing by 15, 20 points.
But with the huge population concentration in Fairfax, it could be a long night before we get enough returns from there before we actually know what happened.
Yeah, it's something, they come in bunches, too. So.
Well, let's go to Steve Schmidt and Robert Gibbs on this, actually. I think of Ed Gillespie running. I think of Ed Gillespie running in Virginia as like Steve Schmidt running in Nevada, or Robert Gibbs running in your home state. I mean, I feel like Ed Gillespie is a behind-the-scenes guy who nobody ever expected to be a candidate on his own terms. It looked like it was a bad idea when nobody thought he had a prayer. What's happening tonight?
Well, he's turned out to be a hell of a candidate, and one of the aspects of this I think it's important to put in context is the Republican Party gave up 6 U.S. Senate seats with deeply flawed candidates over the last 2 election cycles. And when you look at the map in the way that it's playing out tonight in the state of Virginia, it's certainly going to be the case that if Ed Gillespie falls slightly short in this race, it will be because in the most expensive political midterm in American history, his race was not properly funded. And it's just extraordinary. It's a lack of imagination, a huge strategic mistake by the Republicans. And as we move now in this terrain into the purple states, we have the predictable results out of the red states, but we have seen the first defeat by a Republican in a purple state in New Hampshire. We'll see how it plays out now in Colorado, in North Carolina. But a must-win state for Republicans in a presidential election is Virginia. And as Chris pointed out just a bit ago, Cuccinelli left on the field undefended in a close loss to McAuliffe, and now Ed Gillespie. Pretty big mistake if he goes down.
And historically, the most Republican southern state was Virginia. Right, when North Carolina and Georgia were going for Carter, Virginia was not. What's really stunning, as you said, 51% was what Barack Obama got in just 2 years ago. Mark Warner, though, was elected 6 years ago with 65% of the vote. I said this earlier. He walked out of the governor's mansion with a 75 to 80% approval rating. And, you know, what Ed Gillespie and others have done in this race is take somebody who had a profile of winning votes in rural southwestern Virginia and a bipartisan image. They've made him into just the average Democrat in Virginia because he's literally going to walk away with probably, if he's lucky, 51% of the vote.
Extraordinary.
In terms of the Virginia Senate race, too, I'm just thinking about what makes for a surprise. Part of what makes for a surprise is polling. We've seen... Go ahead, Robert.
Well, I would just say this. I saw some people close to the Warner campaign over the weekend, and, you know, they said it was going to be... They thought about a 6-point race. They actually thought it was going to be closer. I think this was one of those races that nobody really polled in and nobody ever really saw, and I think I would absolutely reiterate what you said, Steve, and that is somebody forgot, because you can, you know, to paraphrase Sarah Palin, you can see Virginia from the RNC headquarters, and somebody forgot to take the temperature in a big swing state in a race they may have won.
But how they do that twice in a row? How they do it in 2 it's sitting right there. But how did they screw up the gubernatorial?
It's not like Virginia wasn't polled, though. I mean, there were 4 polls in October in Virginia. They showed Mark Warner up by 10, Mark Warner up by 10, Mark Warner up by 12, Mark Warner up by 7. If I was making spending decisions based on numbers like that, I'd make the same mistake that they were making. I mean, Colorado, the hope for Democrats in Colorado is that the polls are as wrong in Colorado as they've been for the last 2 cycles. The hope for the Republicans in Virginia is that the polls are as wrong as they've been in Virginia, as it looks tonight.
You know, one thing here, there were some early signs, not necessarily in polling, but in the way Mark Warner was conducting himself. He was one of the first people to come out really strongly to criticize the president on how he handled Ebola, which was something that some other Democrats weren't even willing to do. And, you know, the smart Republicans I'm talking to at this point in the night say that they're expecting, for what it's worth, the Virginia race to go to a recount.
Well, you know, I think, one thing that's important to remember in politics, you have to run for something. You have to be for something. And Gillespie ran a very sort of a mad dog anti-Obama campaign, but you knew what he stood for. He wanted to win. He was going to beat the Democratic liberals, if you will. What was Mark Warner running for? What was his message to the voters? I'm here. I'm rich. No, he didn't. I watched the ad campaign. It was on the TV all the time in Washington. I didn't get a sense of why Mark Warner was important to the country.
Mark Warner has always run as, I'm a technocrat, you can trust me.
Technocrat.
I have lots of different kinds of skills.
I will work
have
with
no
everyone.
recognizable ideology.
That's right.
He's always been that.
And it's been successful.
It's been successful.
But this time, that was the issue.
Yeah.
The issue was ideology.
I want to go now back to Kansas. Lawrence O'Donnell is at Greg Orman headquarters in Overland Park in Kansas. And just to remind you what's going on in Kansas right now, that is a Senate race where it is too close to call. There's about 39% of the expected vote in. At this point, it's too close to call, according to NBC News. At Orman headquarters there, Lawrence, how are they feeling about things so far and where they're watching the vote come in from?
They're very encouraged here tonight, Rachel, at Orman headquarters. Republicans are supposed to win Senate races in this state. They have for 80 years. In the general election, no one has a chance against a Republican. But Greg Orman coming in here as a Democrat, coming in here as an independent, with the Democrats vacating the ballot, clearing the way for him to try to get in here and take this seat away from Republican, is running neck and neck. This is completely unpredictable, even at this stage. And there are so many layers of drama in this election here tonight. One of them is a very personal drama that took place within the Republican Party. It started 2 years ago when Bob Dole, for the first and only time since he left the Senate, went to the Senate floor to ask for votes on what was basically a UN treaty that would make basically our the American Disabilities Act international. He needed Republican votes for that. He was betrayed by Republicans on the floor, including Republican Senator Pat Roberts from Kansas, who voted against Bob Dole on the Senate floor. One of the big dramas that occurred here was what is Bob Dole going to do in this campaign? And a few weeks ago, he came to Kansas and he started to campaign for Pat Roberts. And what I have to wonder is, the Bob Dole I knew would have said to Mitch McConnell before coming out here to help the Republicans win this state again, you owe me. You owe me a vote on that treaty if you guys win the Senate. And by the way, you owe me a vote on the treaty even if you don't control the Senate. You owe me the 6 Republican votes that I needed that you wouldn't give me that one and only time I went out on the Senate floor. The drama of Bob Dole entering the campaign trail here is one of the things that closed this for Roberts. There was a gap where Roberts was behind. When Bob Dole got into this campaign, that's when this tightened up.
Lawrence, it's great to hear from a man who knows the intersection of Irish attitude and loyalty and the Senate system as it works. Very few can put it all together like you just did. By the way, we just heard something from Casey Hunt that apparently the president, who's out working tonight, called up Tom Cotton, who won that race down there for the Senate in Arkansas, Clinton country, to maybe begin a relationship there with the new guy. Anyway, one more call we can make tonight. NBC News can now project that Susana Martinez, the Republican, has been reelected governor of New Mexico. She could be on the ticket. Who knows? She's considered a rising star in the GOP. And coming up, Senator Cory Booker, another rising star from New Jersey, who won his race tonight. You're watching MSNBC's live coverage of the election night. And back after this.
NBC News has just been able to project the winner in the Colorado Senate race. Republican Congressman Cory Gardner has unseated Democratic incumbent Senator Mark Udall in the state of Colorado. This has been too early to call for most of the night, but Cory Gardner will take Mark Udall's Senate seat. That is a hugely important strategic victory for the Republicans in their effort to take over control of the Senate overall. The Republicans now have 5 pickups. They need 6 overall to take control of the United States Senate. NBC News can also project the winner in the governor's race in Michigan. Incumbent Michigan Governor, Republican Rick Snyder, has been reelected in Michigan against his Democratic challenger, Mark Schauer. Fascinating. Cory Gardner.
Yeah, Cory Gardner
wins in Colorado, unseats Democratic Senator Mark Udall. I want to go right now to Senator Cory Booker, Democrat of New Jersey, who was just reelected in New Jersey tonight, although he does not know if he will be in the minority or the majority when he goes back to Washington. Senator Booker, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's good to be on, Rachel and Chris. Thanks for having me for a few moments.
Well, congratulations on your reelection tonight. It seems like it was never really in doubt. We were all pretty sure that you were going to win. But as you look at the landscape right now for the United States Senate, what do you think is going to be different if the Republicans do take control? What do you think Democrats will be able to do under leader Mitch McConnell, if that's how far it goes?
Well, look, we're going to have to find a way to, on the issues that matter, from immigration reform to corporate tax reform, we've got to get some things done. And I'm going down there determined to fight to find common ground and move forward. It's a shame that a lot of issues that mean a lot to a lot of people are going to be put on the sidelines, whether it's raising the minimum wage or some of the other things that are the bedrock issues that help people that are often more disadvantaged in life. I just think it's going to be harder for us to set that agenda, and it's just very frustrating tonight to see some great senators like out in Colorado. I went out and campaigned for Senator Udall earlier this summer, and he's a spectacular guy, and running against somebody I thought he would win on the race like that. So it's a tough time for us as Democrats. Low voter turnout around this country in a midterm definitely worked against us, but look, I'm looking forward to going down to the Senate, to whoever's down there, whoever's in the majority. I'll work with anybody, RD or independent, who wants to try to move our country forward.
Well, that is great to hear, Senator. Let me ask you about a problem we've had in the Senate. It is pretty much bipartisan. Harry Reid's job is to keep certain votes from coming to the floor, certain votes to come to the floor. He doesn't want to talk about pipeline and other issues, Keystone and other issues. And now you got a new guy coming in there. Do you think this whole pattern of avoiding anybody looking good? So the number one goal of the Senate leadership is to make sure the Senate doesn't do anything good. You hear already that McConnell Harry Reid, to the extent he'll still have any power, doesn't want Kelly Ayotte to look good because she might get reelected in New Hampshire. This pissant game of using the United States Senate to avoid doing anything. When's it going to stop? When are you guys going to say, let's use each other to get something done? Goose each other into getting something done instead of using the tricks and the rules of the Senate to make sure nothing good looks good for anybody. You must be, you're a clean, positive, new, young force there. You come from a business background. Don't you hate it when nobody wants to do any business? Do anything?
Well, Chris, first of all, I think you'd be surprised. There's a lot of new senators there. I've talked to some of them tonight, all of us, and people on both sides of the aisle who just want to get things done. And I think you're going to see that become an even stronger force with some of the new people that were reelected.
What's the problem? Nothing's getting done. Look at this. Look at the public. It must drive you crazy as a new guy. The public attitude towards the United States Congress is doghouse. It's down in the 20s. Yeah. I've been watching politics for 40 years. I've never seen everybody look down on everybody. Nobody looks good up there. Even you're clean. You're new. But at some point, you're going to be part of the history of the Senate. How do you change it?
Well, again, if I had that script right now, I don't know what it is, but I know that me and a bunch of other folks down there are just sick and tired and want to find ways to pull people together to get things done. And that's why I got elected. I don't want to stick around an institution that can't solve problems that actually Republicans and Democrats both say is a problem. So this is a new test.
Okay, name me a handful of Republicans you think might want to do business in the Senate. You've been there a while. I think Corker wants to do business. Name some guys. People.
Oh, come on. Corker, Lamar Alexander, even on some issues, both Jeff Flake, Mike Lee, Rand Paul and I have all worked together on talking together about criminal justice reform. There's a lot of folks out there that you might even be surprised. Even Orrin Hatch and I have had great conversations about getting things done. In fact, the majority of my bills that I proposed in my first 12 months down there have been done with Republicans. So there's people down there that are willing to work. And I tell you, there is a high level of toxic cynicism in our country right now about Congress, and we've got to find ways, both as a country as well as a body, to begin combating that because there's too much at stake.
Tom Brokaw was talking a while back. Tom Brokaw was talking about he had heard from Senator Portman, who's a moderate Republican, relatively speaking, and they're talking about getting minimum wage by dealing with the Republicans who may be in the majority and trying to give them corporate tax reform, not just a lower rate, but getting rid of loopholes in exchange for getting a minimum wage up to over $10 an hour. Can you see deals like that? I mean, that's what being a politician is, dealing.
Exactly right. Getting into the trenches and start to hammer out some of these compromises that can move our country forward. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for that. As you said, I'm new at this, but that's what I came to the Senate to do. And by God, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and try to work towards that end.
Okay, it's great having. It's an honor to have you on. Congratulations, sir, for winning the Senate seat again from New Jersey. A great state.
Thank you very much.
Anyway,
thank you so much.
We're all here. Casey Hunt.
I want to just run down what just happened in terms of what's going on with the Senate right now, if we can, because the big news that we just got out of Colorado is that NBC News has projected that the winner in the Colorado Senate race is Cory Gardner, the Republican, taking that Senate seat from incumbent Democrat Mark Udall. Now, obviously, that's a huge deal for Colorado. It's a huge deal for Mark Udall and for Cory Gardner. I think you actually saw some real emotion from Cory Booker there, talking about how sad he was to lose Mark Udall as a colleague in the Senate. But in terms of what this does overall to the picture of Washington control, that's the 5th pickup thus far for Republicans. They need 6 in order to become the majority party in the Senate. Right now, the Virginia Senate race, it's too close to call between Ed Gillespie and Mark Warner. Look at the difference in votes here. 92% of the race in Virginia. There's less than 2,500 votes between them. Right now, Mark Warner, the slimmest of all possible leads in that Virginia Senate race. Other Senate races that we're still watching include Iowa, where it is too early to call between Joni Ernst, the Republican, and Bruce Braley, the Democrat. These Senate races right now, including North Carolina, where the polls have been closed for a long time, 85% in North Carolina right now. It is too close to call. Less than 35,000 votes difference between Kay Hagan and Tom Tillis. In Georgia, this one will go to a runoff if nobody gets 50% in the end. Right now, David Perdue, well over 50%, just under 2/3 of the vote in the Georgia Senate race. Again, it will go to a runoff if nobody hits 50, but right now he's outside 50 with another 1/3 of the vote still to come in. This is the picture of the Senate at this hour. I'm pretty sure that Democrats knew they would be there at this point sometime in the night, but they probably didn't know what it would feel like. Republicans right now have 47 seats in the United States Senate. Democrats have 40, plus the 2 independents who have caucused with them in the past.
But not at the risk of being Baghdad Bob.
Yeah.
Okay, I know it's tough now, but there is still a route to victory. That is, they won New Hampshire. They can still win North Carolina. They can win Kansas with Orman. They can go on and win in Alaska, and they can win finally down there when things turn around by January 6th. Lots of things can happen between now and that runoff down there if there is a runoff in Georgia. So it's still possible. Of course, as you pointed out, they can still win Iowa. But it is tricky.
And Virginia is nobody knows what's going to happen in Virginia.
Yeah, we are hearing through the grapevine it looks doable now for Warner, but you're right. It's really close. It's too close to call.
Mark Warner, less than 2,500 votes, but it's 92%.
At this point, the Democrats have to essentially run. I mean, the Colorado is one of those big pivot races, right? In all the models, if the Republicans win Colorado, the odds of Democrats retaining drop.
When the tough gets going, the going get tough. Right?
Yeah, I mean, this Colorado race, I think, is really one of the big sort of bellwethers and should really be a focus, not just tonight, but going forward. I mean, this says a lot about where Republicans could be in 2016. I mean, this is a blue state. They ran a candidate who didn't inflame the electorate. Remember, in 2010, Michael Bennet beat Ken Buck, who was always sort of saying inflammatory things. And, you know, it's a state that looks like America. Its demographics are changing. There's an increasing Hispanic population. And, you know, Republicans are privately saying for weeks that their ground game there was way more impressive than anyone.
What about the Democratic candidate who said he was brain dead, who couldn't name the 3 most influential books he's ever read in his life, who couldn't name a song he'd heard lately?
And
the guy didn't seem to be awake.
He ran a one-note campaign. And, you know, the one thing I will say about Mark
for
Udall,
one note. I didn't hear a note.
One thing about Mark Udall is that people who are focused on NSA issues and sort of, you know, rolling back that kind of power have lost a really powerful advocate.
One thing that's also interesting to watch right now, we've got a call in the Colorado Senate race. We do not have a call in the Colorado governor's race. Yeah. In the Colorado governor's race, we've got this, you know, 74% of the vote in, right? We've got the same precincts reporting, but between Bob Beaupre and John Hickenlooper, NBC is still calling that too early to call. Bob Beaupre and Cory Gardner, 2 very different candidates. John Hickenlooper and Mark Udall, 2 very different candidates. There's interesting dynamics at work in Colorado that are hard to predict. There's a big Latino population that constantly insists that it is being underrepresented in the polls. There's a new method of voting this year in Colorado, wherein everybody in the state got mailed a ballot. That has boosted voter turnout in other states that have done that, in Oregon and Washington. They thought it might boost voter turnout in Colorado. Latino activists who we talked to when I was out there in Colorado last week said they thought that it might particularly help with low-income and Latino voters who have disproportionately don't have access to transportation. Getting mailed the ballot might make a big difference. The Colorado governor's race is going to be interesting to watch, both from a national perspective, but also in terms of what it means about Mark Udall and what he did wrong.
I think that's where Chris's point comes in about Udall as a candidate. And I think this is what Maria and I were saying earlier. You have got to turn people on before you can turn them out. Yeah. You cannot expect people to rally around you if you're not rallying around issues. And I think that's part of what happened to Udall. What is bad about it is it begins to turn the tide nationally, because now we're closer to the Republicans getting those 6 seats. But we can no longer just act as though people are just going to do what you assume they're going to do because you just said that, well, this is the way the party's going. Those games are over with.
Think about, you had four states that Barack Obama won in 2008, Iowa, Colorado, Virginia, and North Carolina, right? And those were big victories. That was decisive. That was turning states over. He lost one of those in 2012, North Carolina, but he retained 3 of them. All 4 of them have extremely contested races tonight, right? So that says that whatever we thought about things moving in some sort of permanent sense into one column or the next, particularly among those 4, there are no permanent victories in politics, right? I mean, that's the reminder.
And you know what? It's not the parliamentary system. Personality matters. A Canadian pollster once told me something I've never forgotten. He said, it's true in every culture. 3 ingredients give you a winning candidate. Motive. You know why they're there. You have to always know why they're there. Never have to ask, because you know why they're a candidate, why they're in public office. 2, passion. They cry. They laugh. They're a real person. And 3rd, this is where a lot of these candidates fall down. Spontaneity. Right. They can react to the unexpected question. They're alive. The lights are on in somebody's home. Robert Gibbs.
Well, I just want to build off the point that Chris was making, because I think regardless of what happens to the Senate at some point later tonight, I think the real judge of this race is not going to be whether or not Democrats lost the South Dakota or Montana Senate races. They're going to be judged, as Chris said, on the 4 swing states that we have Senate races in. Right now, we've got North Carolina as way too close to call. It looks like the Democrats, we've called New Hampshire for the Democrats. We've called Colorado for the Republicans. I think the real judge of how Republicans did in this election on the Senate is, for 2016, is going to be measured by whether they win 3 of these states or 2 of these states or 1 of these states. Because one thing that we should mention, and we do this not because of one side being called to the other, but what happens in 2014 is not at all a prediction of what happens in 2016 macro. But it will matter in a bunch of these swing states, like Senate races in Colorado, Iowa, New Hampshire, and North Carolina.
I think one of the things that stands out in this Colorado race is the amount of money that Udall spent going after Gardner on the war on women's issues that have been so impactful for Democrats over the last 2 election cycles. And we have not had the Todd Akins and the Ken Bucks on the ballot in this election cycle, and those attacks fell flat. Cory Gardner, perfectly pleasant demeanor, doesn't come across like an extremist in the TV ads, and so these attacks fell flat. And I think that whether it was how to deal with the contraception issue in the TV ads, that you see some of these Republican candidates in these purple states showing Republicans how to deal effectively with some of these Democratic attacks that have been so devastating over the last couple of cycles. And remember,
it was Cory Gardner that was originally running for the House seat. Ken Buck was going to run again for the Senate seat. They swapped, and it was considered a huge recruiting coup for Republicans, and now we know why.
Casey?
Yeah. And it's one of the differences, too. You were talking about Kay Hagan in North Carolina. She successfully defined Tom Tillis as being of this sort of very unpopular legislature that was doing all these very conservative things. She made the race about her state and not just about the country. And Mark Udall couldn't manage to pull that off. Obviously, we're still waiting to see whether or not Hagan pulled it out, but it's clear that it's much closer there.
I will say one just anecdotal thing about talking with Mark Udall. I was out there. I was able to interview him in his campaign headquarters. And I had one of these things where we had a camera crew there to shoot me interviewing him. And I said, now, you guys, you should start shooting as soon as I walk in the door, because, you know, in case anything interesting happens in the small talk, I don't want anything to be off the record. I want it all to happen. Something went wrong, and so that couldn't happen. And so I ended up making small talk with him and watching him make small talk with people for about 5 or 10 minutes before we went formally on the record and start the interview. The most likable, dad-like, outdoorsy, friendly, self-deprecating, funny, slouchy, kind of interesting guy in the world. And then cameras came on, and it was,
oh,
and,
boy.
You know, it was like,
what is that?
It became very serious. And one of the things I asked him about is, I said, you seem sort of robotic And you're not giving off a lot of humanity. That's one of the things people are criticizing you for. Cory Gardner looks like a Muppet that's stuck in On. Cory Gardner is always giving that big open mouth smile. I love everything. Everything's so great. And even in answering that, so serious, so wooden.
This is the truth about human beings, is that when they get scared, they get risk averse. So when you think you're going to lose, then you start to act not to make a mistake. And you saw it. I mean, the Alison Lundgren Grimes was and it probably in the end wouldn't have mattered, right? She's going to lose by a significant amount. But this idea that if I keep my head down, I remember the Democrats in 2002, when I was reading strategists talking in 2002, remember when they got creamed, right, in those midterms, talking about, well, we need to take the national security issue off the table. You don't take things off the table. You don't say less things. You don't pull down like this to be a successful politician. You have to actually say things. You have to take chances, right? I mean, there's dumb chances and there's smart chances, but when you get scared and you start to think, if I keep my head low enough, then no one will notice and maybe I'll just get to victory. The voters sniff that out. They always do.
And Mark Udall didn't manage to tell his own story until they started very late in the race to air these ads called Colorado, showing Mark Udall sort of in his personality. He's climbed the 14 tallest peaks in Colorado. He almost summited Mount Everest, and many voters just...
This is a great topic because what you said is true of, to some extent, Secretary Clinton. To some extent. She could be effusive in public, but in personal, she's totally like that. Totally gracious and fun and kidding around. And I was thinking a lot of great show business people, you know these guys, just the opposite.
Exactly.
Johnny Carson, totally introverted in person. Mark Russell, a very quiet guy, but on the stage, he's a great show. Isn't it interesting that's a flip?
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
But don't get away from your original point, Chris, of why you are running.
Yeah, that's motive.
When you're dealing with, as you opened 4 hours ago, when you're dealing with all of the crises that we're seeing in the world, people don't want to have to figure out what you represent. You've got to be very clear that I'm about this. I think that Hayes is right, that there's no permanent parties, but there are permanent interests.
You mean
and people want you to address their permanent interests.
Be like you.
A little bit.
We've got a change in one characterization of a really important race, so I want to actually get to this really quickly. We continue to wait to see whether Republicans get the 6 seats they need to take control of the Senate. But look at this in the Georgia Senate race. Again, this is a race where you got to get 50% to avoid a runoff. At this point, the NBC characterization of this race is that it is still too early to call, but as you see there, David Perdue leads in this race. If David Perdue stays above that 50% threshold, there will not be a runoff in the state of Georgia. You're watching MSNBC's live election coverage. We'll be right back.
Hell of a third-party candidate.
And I spoke too soon. We're not going away. We're staying here to project another important race, the Wisconsin governor's race. Incumbent Republican Scott Walker in Wisconsin, now projected by NBC News to be holding on to his seat. He has defeated Mary Burke, the Democratic challenger in Wisconsin. For comment immediately on that Wisconsin governor's race, let's go to our friend Ed Schultz, who's actually down in Florida, Charlie Crist campaign headquarters. Ed, I got to get your response to Scott Walker being named the winner in Wisconsin tonight.
Well, there's a couple of stories floating down here in Florida, Rachel. First of all, you want to talk about Walker. This is an unprecedented run by a Republican governor to win 3 elections in 4 years. This clearly will put him on the national spotlight, and I think it's going to be hard to keep him off the ticket. I mean, the guy has gone into the middle of the country. He has attacked labor. He's gone after education. He's rolled back a lot of health care provisions. He's suppressed the vote. What hasn't this guy done against the progressive movement? And he's been victorious at almost all of it. I mean, so I think tonight is a huge night for the Republicans, for them to get Colorado, for them to endorse the obstruction that Mitch McConnell has offered up this country and then blame the president. And we're on the verge of a call down here in Florida. I was told here 30 minutes ago that Charlie Crist has already written his concession speech. But as for Walker, it is utterly amazing. There's very few people in American politics that can say, well, I'm election tested. They've put me up 3 times in 4 years and I've won. So I think Walker is now a major player with big credibility. And there was a big flap inside the Republican Party a few weeks ago when Walker came out and said, I don't have enough money to win this.
Hey, Ed,
and
I got to ask you.
Didn't exactly
Hey, you've been in the ring against this guy. You were a big part of the recall. Tell me what moves he's got. I mean, I know it's hard to do it about the guy on the other side of the fight, but what is his resilience about? He doesn't seem to have a lot of charisma. You know, he's a regular-looking guy. What is his ability to just come out and win? We're looking at a pretty good majority here if it holds up.
Well, this is really interesting because I was told earlier today that the election commissioner in Wisconsin had to call in more workers, up to 50 people, because they didn't have enough people to process the lines in heavy Democratic turnout areas. There's a couple of pockets of Wisconsin that the Democrats have not been able to penetrate. It's called Fox Valley. It's a 16-county area around Green Bay. Labor went up there. I believe Joe Biden went up there. I mean, the Democrats threw a lot at that, and they thought that having Mary Burke was going to be able to peel off a lot of women voters. Apparently, that didn't happen. Yeah. Now, in the recall and also in the first time Walker won, he was able to get a strong independent showing in that 16-county area, and that has really been the collar around the neck of the Democrats, unable to move that. You know, strong turnout in Dane County, still not good enough. Strong county turnout in Milwaukee, not good enough. President Obama went into Milwaukee, and I was told today by two sources that they felt the president did everything he could do. He went to the base. This was a base election. It just apparently didn't get out enough people. So Walker is now a major player for the Republican Party. He has a resume that I think, number one, is going to be endorsed by the Koch brothers and all of these money groups that are doing what they're doing in American politics. He's going after workers. He's given tax breaks to the people at the top, and it's working. And it's working in Michigan. This has not been a good night for the Democrats. Now, I want to tell you, down here in Florida, what I'm hearing is that Broward County has overperformed for the Democrats, but Dade County and Palm County, Palm Beach County, they have underperformed, and they're very nervous here. In fact, I was told about a half an hour ago that Charlie Crist has got his concession speech ready to go. It's going to be probably in the neighborhood of 30,000 votes. That's my guess on this tonight, as the way I see it unfold. Now, the law in Florida is this. If it's a 0.5%, then it is going to be an automatic machine recount. If it is a 0.25%, it's an automatic hand recount. And I think all of us know what that can look like as we can go back to the year 2000. But this is rather an amazing thing. Rick Scott, who said he was not going to spend any of his own money in this race, ended up in the last 10 days putting $20 million into it. The Trial Lawyers Association, both here in Florida and nationally, did everything they could to help Charlie Crist down the stretch because they didn't think they were on TV in Miami enough the last couple of weeks. That, of course, was addressed in late conference calls, but apparently it doesn't look like it's going to be enough. Now, also, I was told, if we want to talk about Iowa for just a moment, I got a couple phone calls from Iowa. I'm told that in Jasper County, the county auditor is saying that this is the highest turnout they've ever experienced in Iowa, in Jasper County, in any midterm. And so where Bruce Braley has to show up, it sounds like he has shown up. But, of course, I didn't get too much air of confidence on that phone call, both phone calls, actually, talking about Joni Ernst. Now, look at this race. Joni Ernst, if there's anybody who has gone against the Environmental Protection Agency, get rid of the Department of Education, let's get rid of the IRS. She's even said no to a farm bill. She's even said no to wind tax credits. I find it an amazing night for the Republicans, both in the Senate so far, whether the Democrats hang on to the majority or not, and also the way the governorships are playing out right now. It is the Democrats are in the corner trying to hang on, as I see it.
Ed Schultz in Florida, Charlie Crist headquarters. That Florida governor's race too close to call right now, as Ed was saying.
Just got a word.
97%.
Casey just got the word that Scott Brown has refused to concede. He's hoping for a switch. It's 50-50 right now, very close.
Yeah, just a quick note. I mean, they still think that there are some towns out that might help them. So we'll see.
Okay, the New Hampshire Senate race again. That has been, Jeanne Shaheen has been projected the winner in that New Hampshire Senate race, the Democratic incumbent, but Scott Brown refusing to concede. We do have one other call that I want to make right now. This is a race. It's important, particularly because New England was looking like such an unsettled piece of territory for the Democrats tonight. But Gina Raimondo, the Democrat, is the projected winner in the Rhode Island governor's race. She will be the first ever female governor of Rhode Island, defeating Ellen Fung, who's the Republican mayor of Cranston.
And I believe she's Hispanic, too, a Latina. Interesting. Anyway, let's bring in right now Bob Casey. He's a Democrat, of course, of Pennsylvania. Senator Casey, thanks for joining us tonight. You know, it's interesting. Ed Schultz was very concerned about, and I guess a lot of people are, about this surprisingly conservative switch in the country. You see a lot of races, even Virginia close now. The Republicans are having a very good night, having won 5 new seats in the United States Senate. They're not there yet, but what do you make of it?
Well, Chris, I think here in Pennsylvania, the narrative went the other way. We had a very strong win for Tom Wolf. He may get the last count with about 80% of the vote, and he was at 56%. Chris, you remember the early 60s. Bill Scranton got about 55% of the vote that year. To get your first time running in Pennsylvania, 56% is a tremendous mandate and a significant win, not only as a first-time candidate, but to break that streak where an incumbent wins. So his emphasis on education, on expanding the middle class, fighting for jobs, very strong message, not only as a Democrat, but I think as someone who can now take over the governorship in our state. And you know how competitive this state is, Chris.
What do you think the Tom Corbett problem was? Was it personality? Was it the education cuts? Was it the handling of the Penn State affair as Attorney General, which made nobody happy on either side? I mean, was it the voter suppression that turned out the African-American community, perhaps in Philly? What do you think it was that brought him down so badly?
Chris, I think it was a combination of a lot of things, but I have never seen or rarely seen in a governor's race a single public policy issue be so dominant. But in this case, public education. It was a real fundamental choice to stay on the course, which was not providing the investment or putting Pennsylvania on a different footing when it comes to investing in our kids so they can learn more now and earn more later. Tom Wolf made that case. He was an authentic candidate. He didn't sound and act like a politician, didn't talk like a politician. So I think his background as a business person and his authenticity, but principally his focus on education, was really the difference.
Hey, it's great to have you on. Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania, Democrat. Thanks for coming in. Anyway, we're going to much more tonight. We've got a lot of opportunities right now. We're going to go right now for a report from Scott Brown headquarters. But coming back at that, you're watching MSNBC's live coverage of election night here.
NBC News is making an important call in the Georgia Senate race. Republican David Perdue is projected as the winner over Democrat Michelle Nunn. And what's important here is that what NBC News is projecting is that he will defeat the 50% threshold that would have otherwise sent this race to a runoff. A lot of people thought this race would go to a runoff, but David Perdue is projected to be the outright winner over Michelle Nunn in Georgia. In terms of Senate pickups for the Republican Party, Arkansas, Colorado, Montana, South Dakota, and West Virginia. We also need to go now to New Hampshire. Alex Wagner is at Scott Brown headquarters in Manchester, New Hampshire. Now, NBC News has projected that the winner of the New Hampshire Senate race will be the incumbent Democrat Jeanne Shaheen, but there's noise on the ground in New Hampshire. Alex, what's going on up there in Manchester at Scott Brown headquarters?
There's a lot of noise, Rachel, despite the fact that there are news broadcasts being shown in headquarters saying that Jeanne Shaheen is the projected winner. The crowd is not accepting those results, and the chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party just came out a few moments ago and said this thing is running 50-50. We are not giving up until every vote is counted. They seem confident that when more votes come in from smaller towns across the state, that those margins will change. She said this to rousing cheers of "Go Scott, go." This team is not giving up or waving the white flag in any way this evening.
Alex, in terms of how this is viewed, obviously we are working from the NBC News projection here, which is that Jeanne Shaheen has won. Are they making a case based on which precincts haven't come in and how those precincts have performed in previous elections, like in the Obama election, for example?
They were not, unfortunately, they did not have their own Steve Kornacki with the precinct map, but this seems to be just purely, what she referenced was actually another cable news network, not Fox, that has called this at 50-50. That, I mean, despite many other outlets, all the networks, all the print outlets, you know, Fox News calling this for Jeanne Shaheen. This seems to be a sort of willful momentum declaration more than it may perhaps be based in electoral realities.
Got it.
I've been there. Anyway, thank you, Alex Wagner at Scott Brown headquarters. Sometimes you just want to use the body English. Maybe we can make it happen. Up next, polls will be closed in California. We're going to find out whether Jerry Brown will win, catch this, his 4th term as governor. We continue to watch to see whether the Republicans can win the decisive 6 net votes to take over the Senate. It's getting pretty close. In fact, I may have an announcement to make about that. And this is MSNBC's live coverage of Election Night. Back into this.
NBC News has another important new projection to make. NBC News now projecting the winner in the Kansas Senate race is incumbent Republican Senator Pat Roberts. Pat Roberts defeating the independent challenger Greg Orman tonight in Kansas. Nobody ever would have thought that Kansas would be a hotly contested race before Greg Orman did what he did in that race. But right now, the Senate at this hour, the Republicans have picked up 5 seats. They're at 49 in the Senate. Democrats are at 40, plus 2 independents who have caucused with Democrats in the past. In terms of the polls just closing at 11 o'clock right now, California Governor Jerry Brown, the incumbent Democrat, has been reelected to an unprecedented 4th term in California. That's the projection from NBC News. In other governor's races, John Kitzhaber in Oregon. Too early to call in his race against Dennis Richardson, the Republican in Oregon. In Idaho, the governor's race there, also too early to call. Republican incumbent Butch Otter, the man with the best name in politics, right now too early to call against his Democratic challenger. And in Hawaii, the governor's race there, also too early to call. Democrat David Ige against Duke Aona, the Republican for that Hawaii governor's race after David Ige ousted the former governor Abercrombie in the Democratic primary. Moving on to Senate races right now, the projected winner in the Hawaii Senate race is incumbent Democrat Brian Schatz. In the Oregon Senate race, we've also got a projected Democratic winner. Jeff Merkley, the incumbent Democratic senator, has held on to his seat in Oregon. And in the Idaho Senate race, NBC News projects that the winner is Republican incumbent Jim Risch. Now, in terms of overall control of the Senate, looking at other races right now that have not yet been called, Virginia Senate race, 93% of the vote in. Too close to call between incumbent Mark Warner and his Republican challenger Ed Gillespie. North Carolina Senate, it's 95% in, and too close to call between Tom Tillis, the Republican, and the Democratic incumbent Kay Hagan. In the Iowa Senate race, this one is not too close to call, but rather too early to call between Democrat Bruce Braley and Republican Joni Ernst. And in, interesting, New Mexico, 43% of the vote in New Mexico. This one's not being characterized as too close, but rather too early to call. Tom Udall, the Democratic incumbent there. The Georgia Senate race, the projected winner is David Perdue. NBC projecting that this will not go to a runoff. Michelle Nunn in Georgia is conceding that race, I should tell you. Senate pickups right now, Arkansas, Colorado, Montana, South Dakota, and Virginia. Republican pickups in the Senate. This is Michelle Nunn in Georgia.
So I am very proud to have stood side by side in this campaign with thousands of Georgians who've worked so hard. Your hands, I know some of y'all's hands may be blistered from putting in all those yard signs. And your voices may be hoarse from doing all that shouting and talking and telling people how important this race is. And I know that there's a lot of tired feet tonight because y'all have been walking a lot of neighborhoods. And you could not have worked harder. You know, we have exceeded every expectation of what was possible in this race. I just want to remind y'all that just about 15 months ago, all of the political pundits said that Georgia was not in play, and we put Georgia in play. But we've built a foundation now that needs to be cultivated, and it needs to be built upon. And we need to work on it to broaden our reach with the message. We want to remind people, y'all, that elections make a difference in people's lives. Yes. We change people's lives. We change communities. We change our nation. We change our world when we vote. And we've reminded people of that, and we want to keep reminding people of that. We make choices about how we're going to care for our sick. We make choices about how we care for our environment, how we care for our elderly. And these are the choices that we want to continue to lift up in the future as we go forward. So I hope that we've reminded Georgia also that we can and should have leadership that represents and looks like our state. Yes. You know, during the course of the campaign, I met with a wonderful group of Pakistani and Indian doctors in Warner Robins, and they told me it was the first time that anybody had reached out to them to engage them in this process. And when I left, they said, "You've given us hope and you've given us inspiration." You all did that. So I started out this election saying that I'm optimistic about America, and I have never been more optimistic than I am right now today after 15 months of seeing the extraordinary idealism, commitment, and passion of Georgians. And I was reminded time and time again of our Georgia State motto. Y'all have heard me say it, right? But I have seen it embodied in our Georgia citizenry: wisdom and justice and moderation. So tonight, more than anything, I want to thank you all, to the staff and to the thousands of people who've worked so hard on this campaign, for the future of our state, for the future of our country, for your commitment and for your dedication. Each one of you here has given so much: your talents, your resources, a lot of sleepless nights, and an unrelenting commitment. So I am so grateful to have walked this path with you, to be fighting for something that transcends us all and that we'll continue to work towards. And I want to say a few thanks to my family, because otherwise it would be out of control, the number of people that I would have to thank.
You're listening
but I want to
Michelle Nunn in the great state of Georgia. That's her concession speech tonight. NBC News has projected that David Perdue will not only win that race, but will win it by clearing a 50% threshold, the 50% threshold necessary to avoid a runoff election in December in Georgia. So that will be, in January in Georgia. So David Perdue will be the next senator from the state of Georgia. In terms of what's outstanding right now in the Senate, here's the big thing you need to know right now. Republicans now have 50 U.S. Senate seats. If Republicans stay at 50 U.S. Senate seats, the Democrats control the Senate because they've got a guy named Joe Biden who will be the tie-breaking vote. But there are outstanding races yet to come. Virginia, North Carolina, Iowa, interestingly, New Mexico are all outstanding. And in Alaska, the polls are still open. For understanding what's going on in some of these races where we're still waiting on a result, and therefore the control of the United States Senate, we turn to our numbers guru, Steve Kornacki. Steve, what's going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, you just set it up really nicely, Rachel. So right there, these are the states that are outstanding. You mentioned New Mexico. You can't see it there, but basically the Republicans are one away. Any one of these, now we've already called Louisiana going to a runoff, so any of these other 4 states up here, if they move to the Republican column, Republicans win the Senate. It could be Louisiana in a runoff. It could be tonight in one of these states. Democrats, you know, they need the full house here, basically. They need everything to move over into their column. Now, we can look a little bit closer at what's going on. First of all, in Virginia, I can just tell you, we were talking earlier about Fairfax County being critical, about Warner needing to make up the difference there and get into the lead. All of Fairfax County came in, and it was enough to put Mark Warner ahead by about 2,500 votes in Virginia. What was left? There were some precincts in Virginia Beach. That's a Republican area. It did not look like there were enough precincts there to lift Gillespie back to where Warner is, and there were a few other scattered precincts around the state. So that's the best opportunity right now for Democrats. I do want to take you look closely, though, at North Carolina. As you showed a minute ago, a lot of the vote in North Carolina, and we can tell you right now, let's try to put it up. We can tell you right now when you look at this that Kay Hagan is in a world of trouble. She's about 50,000 votes behind right now. If you look closely at what's going on here, you can see Wake County. This was key to Kay Hagan's hopes night. This is Raleigh. This is the state capital. This is densely populated. She won this thing by 13 points over Tom Tillis. I think the expectation of Democrats was they were going to get a bigger spread than this out of Wake County. We can show you what's left. The hope that Democrats have right now to come back in North Carolina, you look Mecklenburg County. There are still outstanding votes. This is Charlotte. Can they get some votes out of Charlotte? And the other thing we can look here, and this is where the city of Greensboro is. Guilford, outstanding vote here, too. This is a Democratic area. I don't know if she can get 50,000 back. There's still some other stuff out besides this, but that's what she's got to do. And one other thing I want to update you on. We're talking about Scott Brown apparently refusing to concede the race in New Hampshire. I can tell you this. Here are the 5 biggest cities or towns that are still yet to report in New Hampshire. I'm going to give you the names, and I'm going to give you the percent of the vote that Barack Obama won in them in 2012. Dover, 60% for Obama. Claremont, 60% for Obama. Franklin, 58% for Obama. Rochester, 52% for Obama. Keene, 70% for Obama. Those are the biggest places in New Hampshire yet to report. Shaheen is holding on to a lead right now, and those are some very Democratic areas that have yet to come in.
Scott Brown, again, wanting and wishing and hoping, but yeah.
Well, that may be the one Democratic victory tonight in all the contested races. Anyway, let's go right now. We got a big announcement to make right now. Georgia Governor Nathan Deal, the incumbent, has won. It looks like he will not have to have a runoff. He's won the election. So I want to talk to Michael about this. It looks to me like your party, the Republican Party, could win 9 seats in the Senate right now. If you look at
they're on track.
Which way they're all going, and we're going to have to wait a little bit to find out Louisiana, but it can be 9. Oh, here we go. This is a surprise. Illinois governor. NBC has projected Bruce Rauner, the challenger, has defeated Pat Quinn, the incumbent governor of Illinois. Unbelievable. This is amazing. Michael, I just want to add to that. That was a big pickup by a self-financing challenger.
Yeah, that was one of those races for the longest time that a lot of Republicans were kind of holding their breath over because just, it's Illinois. You got Chicago. There's so much. It's Obama. But again, I think what the Republican Party tapped into was this real frustration with incumbents, and they ran a national campaign and applied it to everyone up and down the
Well, Billy Daley was going to run. The former chief of staff to President Obama was going to run in that race, thinking that Quinn was weak. He was right. Quinn was weak. Andrea.
It's also a real blow to President Obama. There's no way that you can't call it a blow to President Obama because he campaigned for him. That was one race that the president really did want to win.
Pat Quinn, fascinating case, though. I mean, how did Pat Quinn become governor in the first place? A guy named Rod Blagojevich. Rod Blagojevich and his hair go to jail. That's how Pat Quinn gets the race.
That's the good news for Quinn.
He ends up standing there.
He doesn't have to go to jail.
No, it's true. And for Illinois governors, that's
not a bad close for him. I mean, there's been 5 of them.
To penetrate a lot of the Chicago base, he got a lot of the ministers and all. I'm surprised Rayner won, but I'm not shocked because Quinn had problems. And I think that I agree reluctantly with Michael Steele that the Republicans gained a lot from anti-incumbency. But I think they tapped their base, and I really question in some areas where the Democrats did not really tap their base. Illinois being one. I don't think that's the case everywhere else.
In that Illinois governor's race, Pat Quinn had to run for it in 2010, and he won by less than 1% of the vote in 2010, which was such a bright red year, at the same time that Illinois picked a Republican senator in Mark Kirk in that same election. So Pat Quinn, for how unpopular he is and how difficult his circumstances have been, has been a real survivor. So for him not to be able to pull it out tonight, given how resilient he's been, it's a very very, very telling thing. I should also say that Georgia governor's race is a big deal.
Yeah.
Nathan Deal has never lost an election in his entire life. Jason Carter gave him a tough fight. Nathan Deal's got some ethics trouble. He brought the state of Georgia to a standstill in a snowstorm earlier this year, last winter, that in a way that people thought might really hurt him. But he's cleared that 50% threshold.
I followed the apostle of hope here tonight, but the sea seems to have gotten away from me.
The Southwest Passage or whatever it was going through Georgia doesn't look open anymore.
Steve Schmidt and Robert Gibbs, did you want to jump in here?
Sure. Look, I think one of the dramas unfolding here tonight, I think there was no expectation that Tom Corbett was going to win the election. He was for sure a goner. This is turning out to be a very big night, I think, for Chris Christie. Raised over $100 million for the RGA. Rick Scott is looking like he's going to make it through. You look at the Scott Walker race, a decisive victory for him. Clearly one of the top-tier Republican presidential candidates coming out of this race, very strengthened. And so it looks like the Republican governors are performing at very much the same level that you're seeing in the United States Senate right now.
Well, and what's surprising in some of these races is how quickly they're being called, right? In Michigan and Wisconsin, I think we thought we might go a little bit later into the night. They might be more competitive. Carl Levin's successor is going to be a Democrat in the Senate, but the governor's race was called very quickly. In the case of Pat Quinn, he had about a 35% approval rating. As Rachel said, having to clean up the Blagojevich mess and all the budget mess that went with it greatly pushed down his approval rating, and he got killed tonight in the suburbs. So I think you're right, a very big night for Republican governors in big states and in some important states. I will say one of the things, we haven't talked about this race, we won't talk about this race much, but the Wendy Davis race in Texas, she's right now a little bit less than 40%. Bill White got 42.3% against Rick Perry 4 years ago. So Democrats invested a huge amount of money in battleground Texas, in this notion that they could turn Texas purple. And I think tonight the question is whether or not Wendy Davis will get a vote equal to the percentage that Bill White got just 4 years ago in getting crushed by Rick Perry.
And I do think the only silver lining that appears for Democrats tonight is this New Hampshire race where Jeanne Shaheen has a 2,000 vote lead. And I think the providence of that victory may very well rest with the Clintons. With Hillary Clinton up campaigning late for Jeanne Shaheen, obviously a popular figure in the state. So a really resounding at this hour, defeat and rebuke, I think, to the president. And I think Republicans, are on the verge of exceeding their wildest expectations for this night.
I think we are not going out on a limb to say that it is not the Clintons' last trip to New Hampshire.
I think you are right.
What is the significance of New Hampshire? I'm just kidding. I was thinking that Al Gore didn't get New Hampshire, which was fascinating. The Clintons always do. And I did point out earlier tonight that in Google searches, under the name of looking up, say, Jeanne Shaheen, one of the prominent names they wanted to look up with that name was Hillary Clinton. So Hillary Clinton is associated with her, fairly enough. And so it's interesting to see how the Clintons do exploit this.
And
Andrea.
In fact, when I the other day was interviewing Jeanne Shaheen and asked her, did she want President Obama to campaign for her? She said, oh, no, he's so busy with ISIS and Ebola. He's got to be commander-in-chief. But do you want the Clintons? Yes, Hillary and Bill, they're coming back, and they're coming back, and they're coming back. So that did work for her.
They're free. They're freed up.
Well,
anyway,
in all fairness, they won a lot of places that we lost tonight, too. So let's not act like it was just all everywhere. They went to Arkansas. They went to...
They spent a long time in Kentucky.
A lot of
Secretary Clinton, if you're watching MSNBC, and I'm sure you're right now, Reverend Sharpton wants to talk to you about this issue.
And me.
He wants to talk about it on another basis, too. That you will have an opponent in the election of 2016. Anyway, let's find out more about what's happening in North Carolina right now. This is one still up in the air. Melissa Harris-Perry's there, our colleague. She's with the Kay Hagan headquarters right now in Greensboro. What's up?
Well, I mean, at the moment, you feel, I think, the sense here that it is going to be a long night and a tough night. I was talking with some of the Hagen staffers who are, they don't have that sense of jubilant expectation that they're about to win. Quite the opposite, lots of hand-wringing and anxiety at this moment.
Well, let me ask you about this campaign, because it seemed to have turned in the last couple of days if Tillis wins. What happened in the last couple of days? What did he do? Do you know?
I'm not sure. Yeah, so I'm not certain, actually, that it changed dramatically. I think there's a couple of things in operation here. One, we know that we had enormous voter turnout, both today, but also in early voter turnout, which absolutely topped what happened in 2010. So we know that this is not about necessarily a down midterm election. There's been major turnout, but I think we may have underestimated the extent to which turnout in this race could have been driven by national issues, not only for the Democrat in this case, the question of trying to distance herself from President Obama, but also for Republicans here. So one of the things we saw was an uptick for Tillis immediately after the federal judiciary rulings about marriage equality that brought marriage equality here to the state of North Carolina. Now, for many progressives, that was a kind of moment of expectation and of celebration. But for many conservatives, it suddenly became a kind of social issue, a reason to come out and vote for Tillis, even though Tillis and Hagen themselves weren't making that an issue in their campaign. I think also early on we saw a lot of education as the primary discussion point. Within the context of education, Hagen could do a good job of really sort of painting Tillis as the bad guy. But as it moved over the course of this kind of final part of October to a question about the president's handling of national issues, again, Tillis was able to use his appeal as an outsider. But the final thing I'll say is, look, there hasn't been a Democratic senator reelected in North Carolina since 1968. So the other possibility here is that we're just looking at the reality of what this state is for Democratic senators.
Yeah, well, it looks like the state is going to look like it moved to the right. We'll see. Thank you so much, Melissa. That was really good insight because of these cultural factors. Marriage is a big issue on both sides of the issue. We keep forgetting that up here in the big cities. But the fact is, it's a negative for some people. It does draw them out. Remember 2004, what happened in Ohio, when Don King brought in all that stuff, all that the ministers in Cuyahoga County. I know that's a long time ago, but it'll work with the conservatives, including black clergymen.
But I think that a lot of the things that we've got to be strategic progressives is that you've got to always factor in where you're going to get a reaction or a backlash. And I think that may be what we saw in North Carolina, including a lot of the demonstrations and all. You've got to know how to have a winning strategy, not just a dramatic strategy.
Let me jump in here because David Perdue is giving his victory speech in Georgia. Let's listen to a little bit of that.
And we don't want to leave this world to our kids without trying to make it better. Most importantly, Georgians want good-paying jobs. And to do that, we've got to get this economy going. We have to finally resolve our tax problems. And right now, Saxby Chambliss is handing the baton over to me, and I'm going to fight for the fair tax.
So check this out. Governor's races right now. The outstanding governor's races right now are fascinating. This is Florida governor right now, 97% in, too close to call between Rick Scott and Charlie Crist. Rick Scott with a very narrow lead, under 80,000 votes, 97% in. Look at this. Maine, the three-way governor's race there, about 2/3 of the vote in. Paul LePage over Mike Michaud. Too close to call in Maine, 48-44 right now. In Connecticut, fascinating. Tom Foley versus Dan Malloy, the Democratic incumbent, less than 10,000 votes between them, less than half the vote in. Too close to call in Connecticut. In the Kansas governor's race, look at this. Incumbent Republican Sam Brownback, too close to call, but narrowly leading Paul Davis, the Democrat. I'm saying narrowly leading just based on my count of the distance between them. That's 77% of the vote in Kansas. In Maryland, look at this. Blue state Maryland. Right now, too close to call between the serving Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown, the Democrat, and the Republican challenger Larry Hogan. That's fascinating. We're going to be talking about that in just a moment. In the Colorado governor's race right now, remember, the Senate race in Colorado has been called for Republican Cory Gardner, but in the governor's race, it is too early to call and very tight between Republican Bob Beaupre and the incumbent Democrat John Hickenlooper. Now, Massachusetts governor with 82% in, too close to call between Charlie Baker, the Republican, and Martha Coakley, the Democrat. I actually think we've got a Senate call that we can add to that list of governors right now. A brand new call in the New Mexico Senate race. Tom Udall, not to be confused with Mark Udall. Tom Udall, the incumbent from New Mexico, the Democrat, will be returning to the Senate. NBC News is now projecting that New Mexico Senate seat stays in his hands and in Democratic hands. That means that the overall Senate projection at this hour is that there are 43, count it 45, if you lump in the the independents. On the Democratic side, Republicans hold 50 seats. They only need one more Senate seat from anywhere in the country to give themselves the Senate majority and to put Mitch McConnell in charge in that body. On those governor's races, though, Massachusetts governor Charlie Baker, the Republican, Martha Coakley, the Democrat, Steve Kornacki, you know Massachusetts better than anybody else working in national politics right now. What's happening there?
Yeah, well, my home state, I'd love to talk about it, and let's show you. This is a barn burner right now in the Bay State, and you can see Charlie Baker. Well, I don't know why it did that. Let's go right back in there and take a look at it. Still learning this thing, I guess. There you go. Charlie Baker, right now, the Republican, leading by about 5,000 votes over Martha Coakley. Now, there's some good news and some bad news for Coakley when we look closely at the map here. We're going to look at all 353 cities and towns in Massachusetts. Actually, we're not going to. We're just going to get a blank map. Here's what I can tell you. I'm still learning this. Here's what I can tell you has happened in Massachusetts tonight. In 2010, when Martha Coakley lost that special election to Scott Brown, one of the biggest weaknesses she had was a lot of blue-collar, small and mid-sized cities that traditionally vote Democratic defected and went to Scott Brown. They liked the pickup truck and that sort of thing. They went with him. She's made up ground in a lot of those places tonight. For instance, the city of Lowell. It's the fourth largest city in Massachusetts. She carried that tonight. She lost that back in 2010. Waltham, another blue-collar, mid-sized city outside Boston. She lost it in 2010 to Scott Brown. She carried it tonight. She has done much better tonight than she did in 2010. The problem is it may not be enough. As we say, she's 5,000 votes behind right now. The biggest Democratic producing city left on the map, Lawrence, an old mill town on the Merrimack River, that just came in, and it left her still behind. What you have left now are a lot of, there's some blue-collar areas right in the Boston area like Winthrop that you would expect to go to Baker or be about even. Then you got a lot of sort of small and mid-sized towns in central Massachusetts, places that are more Republican-friendly. I'm looking at the map. I'd love to show it to you, but I was looking at it a few minutes ago. It is hard for me to see her making it up. She's done much better than in 2010 tonight. There is still a pathway, but it's very narrow for her right now.
Well, thinking about, obviously, there's the Massachusetts map in terms of what's happening internally there, but actually the governor's race map of the entire country right now is fascinating. You look at the places where stuff is contested, too close to call. It's a blue state map. Maryland, Connecticut, Massachusetts, right? These are blue states where they haven't been able to call the governor's race. In Colorado, it's still too early to call. Florida, too close to call. Maine, too close to call. Kansas is the only one right now still too close to call. That's a blood red state, and that's because I think of the peculiarities of Sam Brownback's governing philosophy and what it has done to the finances of the state of Kansas. But we've got, in Steve Kornacki, a Massachusetts expert. We've also got a Maryland expert in Michael Steele, former Republican Party chairman, and also former lieutenant governor from the state of Maryland. When you look at those races, you look at those results thus far, what do you see?
I see excitement on one end, but I also see the practicality of tax and spend policies in the state. And that's what a lot of people reacted to. And Larry Hogan made this race about taxes and spending. And he did it very effectively. And Brown didn't have an answer to 40 tax increases over the last 8 years. He didn't have an answer to losing jobs in the state. And if you don't have those answers, the voters are going to go to someone who did, and Larry apparently does. 79% of the vote is in right now in the state, and it's almost $100,000 vote difference.
Well, so I should be clear. The Maryland governor's race right now, characterized by NBC News as too close to call. So it's certainly not done. But if Larry Hogan, the Republican, does beat Anthony Brown, does that pose problems for Martin O'Malley as he tries to springboard from being Maryland governor into being being a Democratic presidential candidate.
Absolutely. I would say that it is completely defeating in his attempts if he were going to attempt
Well, it's
to
not
run.
him on the ballot. It's his lieutenant
it's his
governor.
record. It's his lieutenant governor, and his lieutenant governor was a very quiet, sort of also ran kind of person to, let's just put it
to Martin O'Malley.
To Martin O'Malley.
Well,
I mean, his
O'Malley
lieutenant
really
governor
had a lot to do with his winning the primary. I mean, he was really behind Anthony. I think, that this is a big deal if Anthony Brown is defeated.
We have a huge call that I need to interrupt you for. I'm sorry, Rev. NBC News has now been able to make a call in one of the most important Senate races in the country, and this is the enchilada for the Republican Party. The projected winner in the Iowa Senate race is Joni Ernst. This is an Iowa gain for the Republican Party, but this also means that Republicans gain control of the United States Senate. This is their 6th pickup. They needed to pick up 6 seats in order to take control. This puts them at 51 guaranteed Republican seats, even before we get to the Louisiana runoff, and even before we get to final results in North Carolina, Virginia, or Alaska, where the polls are still open in Alaska. So at this point, Joni Ernst is over the top in Iowa. That means the Republicans are over the top in terms of Senate control. Wow, that's
it's true.
It's true?
It's true.
It is true.
And the only thing left now is the new numbers we haven't gotten in. Alaska, about 2 or 3 in the morning. We'll find out. We're not going to get Louisiana. The big one we're watching right now is North Carolina. But the only thing they've done is, hold on, this is, I would call, a wave. Now, people will dispute the use of the term, but the fact that Maryland, which is endemically gut-level Democrat, with a decent candidate, and Larry Hogan, an old familiar name. His father, of course, was the congressman there for years. But it's an old familiar name. There's nothing dashing about this guy. Maryland goes Republican for governor. Well, it's happened a couple times in our lifetime. Agnew and Ehrlich. Your guy.
Right. Well, he's Larry Hogan is a work guy. I mean, he identified with a lot of grassroots, everyday folks. And I think that's made the difference across the country tonight.
And, I don't think we should underestimate the power of this medium. Everybody talks about ground game and all that, and I like that stuff. But I'll tell you, when you sit and watch television a lot, like I do, Larry Hogan had a good appearance on television.
He did.
We got to go to Iowa right now.
Go ahead.
Luke Russert, who's at Joni Ernst headquarters in West Des Moines, Iowa. Joni Ernst has just been declared by NBC News the projected winner in that Iowa race. That not only is huge news for her, but for Republican control of the Senate. Luke, do they know it yet there?
No, they know it. They were just cheering quite loudly, and they were being quite confident all night, Rachel, as the governor, Terry Branstad, won. Our local affiliate called the race for Ernst quite early in the night. They really just cheered loudly when Fox News called it. But what this reflects, Rachel, is what we saw over the last few days, which was the early vote numbers were just not there for Bruce Braley. And for a Democrat, usually to win in Iowa, they run up the score in the early vote, hold the line on Election Day when Republicans usually outperform them. And the reason why that happened is that Bruce Braley made a series of errors. We're seeing this as somewhat of a GOP wave tonight, but he was, I think it's fair to say, a flawed candidate. Perhaps he never got over his gaffe of saying that Chuck Grassley was just a simple Iowa farmer, and he, who didn't go to law school, who would become head of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Something that really plagued Bruce Braley, because when we looked into the metrics of the polls on this issue of who cares more about you, something that Democrats almost always win on, Joni Ernst was besting Bruce Braley. She also bested him on Medicare and Social Security, 2 issues where he attacked her a ton. Over $58 million was spent on this race. TV was unwatchable, according to people we spoke to. But Joni Ernst wins tonight, and I will say this. She goes to Washington, and she instantly becomes a hot commodity. She's 44 years old. She's a woman. She's a veteran. She led troops in Iraq. And she is somebody who sits in a state where every Republican hopeful on the Republican side is going to want her endorsement and covet her endorsement. So she's someone that once she's in the Senate, pay attention to her voting record, pay attention to what she says. She came up through a GOP primary here with a Tea Party label, was made famous by her ad talking about castrating pigs. She's gone away from sort of shall we say, the hot button issues for making outlandish statements, been much more vague, much more general. If she continues on that path going into Washington, I think that you could see somebody who will move up in the national ranks of the Republican Party so quickly, because woman, veteran, young. They don't have a lot of those on the Republican side at all.
Okay, Lawrence, thanks, Luke. Let's bring in Lawrence O'Donnell right now. He's at the Greg Orman headquarters in Cleveland, actually Overland Park, Kansas. I guess it's over in terms of Senate control. So does this mean that Greg Orman, if he wins tonight, which he probably won't win since he lost, right? What's he going to do now with his life? That's my question.
Chris, Greg Orman gave a really warm and positive concession speech here. He said that his campaign shows that independents do have a chance in running for the United States Senate. He is now still in this room personally thanking every one of the hundreds of people who are in this room to cheer him on at the end. But, Chris, the picture of what happens in the Senate now, we won't really know until we get that final number of exactly how many Republicans are there. If it's just the 51, that means that any one of the Republicans in the majority basically become almost a majority leader because they can stop anything that Mitch McConnell's trying to do. If you listen to the text and the spirit of Mitch McConnell's victory speech tonight, it was very gracious. It was an old-fashioned senatorial victory speech. It was the victory speech of someone who, if you take him at his word, wants to go back to actually working in the Senate. Now, I don't know if he's going to be able to, even if he intends to. What I do know is that Mitch McConnell worked in the Senate back when the Senate worked. He was one of the responsible Republican members of the Senate 20 years ago, and he knew how to make things happen and knew how to get things done there and form alliances there. I don't know if that's an impossible thing to do in the modern Senate with the Ted Cruzes and others who will want to, who, as they've announced, just wants to investigate the president. That's all Ted Cruz thinks the Senate's for. So it's very hard to tell right now, Chris, what is going to happen in the Senate when it's very closely held like this. One of the problems is when the Senate and the House, when they're held by very close majorities, the business of the minority tends to become nothing other than defeating the majority in the next election 2 years from now.
Let's talk about the use of... Let's talk about the use of these chairmanships. I hear Ron Johnson's in line now to take over the Permanent Investigating Subcommittee, which can do anything at once. It has, this procedure. The majority has complete control of the subpoena power. They could spend the next 2 years under Ron Johnson, who is to the right of, I understand, to the right of Mitch. They've had leadership fights to prove it. What is that going to look like? I mean, you talked about the fact that Mitch might not be able to control the troops.
Well, one of the things that both leaders have done is control chairman for the last several years. That's a new thing in the Senate, Chris. It used to be that Senate chairmen were all powerful and the majority leader would beg the chairman to do certain things, and if the chairman felt like it, then he would. That's not the way it works now. Harry Reid really took control away from chairman. Mitch McConnell is in a position to try to do that. I think he probably can, following the Reid model. So I, for one, am not terribly concerned with all kind of the horror scenarios that are going on out there about which Republican is going to be chairman of which committee, because the committees haven't been doing any business at all in this Senate. They have not been marking up bills. They have not been generating any kind of committee product. But again, that could change. That could revert to the old Senate style where, yes, the chairman of the committees do have power and they do start to generate their own work product. It's something we're going to have to wait a couple of months to see.
I think it was very wonderful, in fact, impressive that you picked up on Mitch McConnell's different point of view. When Mitch first responded to the election of President Obama, he said, I'm going to destroy this guy's presidency. That was his ambition. Yes. Totally, utterly, obviously and apparently, transparently negative. And now tonight he looked like maybe he wants to get some things done in his later years, to be blunt about it.
Yes, but let's not be surprised if there's a handful or more of Democratic senators whose ambition is now to destroy Mitch McConnell. That is the dynamic that we've seen in both bodies when there is a power shift, when the majority loses power to the minority in the House or in the Senate. Their immediate reaction is, how do we get it back? How do we get it back? And they devote themselves to nothing else.
If this becomes a real field day for Republicans tonight, and they pick up 9 seats or so, and they end up at 54. Does that put Harry Reid in trouble? Would Chuck Schumer, you know him, would he make a run for the leadership, take on Reid?
My bet tonight is, Chris, that he wouldn't, because it's really, at this point, not a job worth having. This is not the place to make your name at this point in time. I think Chuck Schumer's in a position to wait out Harry Reid. Harry Reid could also decide on his own, Chris, after a night like this, that maybe it is time for a change. And it is also possible that his caucus could decide it is time for change. But I don't think Chuck Schumer would lead the charge for a change in leadership that way.
Lawrence O'Donnell at Greg Orman headquarters in Kansas, where Pat Roberts is projected to be the winner in that race. Thank you, Lawrence. I will say there's a lot of governor's races still outstanding at this point: Colorado, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Florida, Maine, Maryland, Kansas. One of those governor's races that has been called is for Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. Do we have a little bit of Scott Walker's victory speech tonight? No, we don't. That's what you win. When Scott Walker wins, you win absolutely nothing.
I think Ed Schultz got rid of it. Don't you?
You think so?
I think he saw it. They killed the tape.
Ed was like, I've got the audio block button on this one. Chuck Todd, while you're here, this race in Iowa, obviously, it's big news for Joni Ernst and for Iowa, but it's bigger news for the country in terms of Senate control for the Republicans.
It is, and I heard Chris right before I joined your table over here. This is a wave tonight. Let's not beat around the bush. This is a wave. This is a big win. They could get up to 9 seats. I think when you look at it, that's big. You look at you brought up Scott Walker. We got Rick Scott, Maryland governor's not called yet. That says something. This was clearly Republican momentum at the end. They're going to have the largest House majority since World War II. Maybe they find another seat, and it's the largest number of Republicans in the House of Representatives since 1928. I don't know what else you want to come up to with the definition of wave. And listen to this stat. So Bruce Rauner, the new Republican governor-elect in Illinois, first time the president's home state governor lost re-election since 1892.
Wow.
Okay, there's no way to slice this. And I do think when Democrats I think there are 2 people to blame here for the problems that Democrats have. You can say President Obama's one. Harry Reid's the other. How he ran the U.S. Senate, and he did this to protect all these guys from taking tough votes. I think it hurt Mark Pryor, it hurt Mary Landrieu, and it hurt Mark.
Explain that. We have to go to Iowa right now.
Okay, because I want to explain that. I want you to explain that.
Let's go to Joni Ernst.
It's a long way from Red Oak to Washington. From the biscuit line at Hardee's to the United States Senate. But thanks to all of you, we are heading to Washington. And we are going to make them squeal. Thank you. Thank you. This morning I was voting in Red Oak, and as I looked around, I noticed that this is about as different as you can get from Washington, D.C. In Washington, politicians are more interested in talking than doing. They ignore problems, hoping they'll go away. But you know what? ISIS isn't just going to go away. The almost $18 trillion of national debt is not just going to go away. Our economic struggles aren't just going to go away. And our problems aren't just going to go away on their own. But we can overcome them. Because this is the greatest nation in the history of mankind. And there is nothing we can't achieve. We are going to do this. But to get there, it starts with new leadership. And that's what Iowa has voted for today. Yes. We've talked a lot in this campaign about Iowa values: honesty, service, and hard work. Knowing the value of $1 and not to waste it. These are the values that our parents and grandparents have taught us. These are the values that my mother that my mother taught me on rainy mornings. Not with a lecture or a book, but with plastic bread bags. You see, growing up, I only had one good pair of shoes. And so on those rainy school days, my mom would slip plastic bread bags over my shoes to keep them clean and dry. You know what I'm talking about. Thank you. And you know what? It wasn't high fashion, but I was never embarrassed. And it worked. And it worked. So it wasn't high fashion, and I wasn't embarrassed because every day when it rained and I got on the school bus, there were rows and rows and rows of other kids just like me with plastic bread bags tied to their feet. These were the sons and daughters of hard-working Iowans. And our parents didn't have much. But what they did have, they worked very hard for. They taught us to live simply, not to waste, and to help our neighbors. And they taught us to thank God every day that we live in this special place that we call Iowa. Thank you. Thank you. People ask me all the time what my favorite part of the campaign has been. Well, I think tonight, nothing is going to beat tonight. But before tonight, my favorite part of the campaign was going through the Iowa State Fair. And believe me, I hugged my way through the Iowa State Fair. And if you got within 5 feet of me, it was probably because I was trying to hug you. I love the State Fair because it truly is a celebration of what is best about Iowa. Our agriculture, our manufacturing, our technology, our community, and our family. That's who we are, and that's the Iowa way. And our Iowa way is working, and it's not luck or an accident. It's because we have the greatest people, and we have the greatest governor and lieutenant governor of any state in the nation. Here in Iowa, we understand that America's greatness doesn't come from its government, but it does come from our people. And look, yes,
Joni
and
Ernst,
look at the
Iowa
results.
State Senator, Republican, NBC News projecting her as the winner tonight over Democrat Bruce Braley for the open Iowa Senate seat. Joni Ernst is the kind of candidate who I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of in terms of her national impact, if only because she's from Iowa. She just won this Senate seat that Democrats thought they'd be able to hold on to. And heading into 2016, her endorsement and her sort of, I guess, willingness to sign on with other Republicans as they head toward Iowa is going to become an important thing. So if you like that speech, you'll hear a lot more of it.
It leaves Mississippi now as the only state in the union that has never sent a woman to Congress.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Let's remember this. Iowa was one of 2 states, and now, okay, Mississippi.
Iowa had never sent not only just a senator, but not a member of the House either.
Right, exactly. Mississippi, you're up.
We have 2 other things that we need to bring you up to date on that have happened since we last did this. One is that we do have a call in the Oregon governor's race. NBC News can project that in the Oregon governor's race, Democratic incumbent John Kitzhaber has been able to hold on to that race. There was some excitement in that race around some late revelations about the Oregon governor's fiance and her very interesting past life before she was with him, but he has been able to hold on to tonight. John Kitzhaber will be returning to the governor's mansion in Oregon. And there's something going on in Florida that nobody quite understands. But here's what's going on. In the Florida governor's race, NBC News has not projected a winner in this race. NBC News says this is too close to call, but Rick Scott has just taken to the podium at his headquarters in Florida to say that he called Rick Scott to congratulate him on winning the race. Ed Schultz is at Charlie Crist headquarters in St. Petersburg, Florida. Ed, what's going on?
Well, a number of news agencies have called it, so there was really some wondering as to whether what was going to unfold here. And what did happen is that Charlie Crist came out and took the high road, didn't say anything about any kind of voter irregularity that was contested earlier tonight as he was looking for another hour out of Broward County. Didn't say anything about that. Right. He talked about friendship. He talked about values. He talked about thank you for the great effort. You're wonderful people. And it was just the high road across the board, and it was very short and to the point.
Ed, I need to cut you off there just for a second. As you were speaking, NBC News did change its call and project Rick Scott as the winner of the Florida governor's race. So NBC had not been doing that. Had been calling it too close to call for a long while yet. But we have one other call that we need to make in a Senate race. In the North Carolina Senate race, NBC News now projects that Kay Hagan has lost her seat, that Republican Tom Tillis has won the North Carolina Senate race, ousting Kay Hagan from her seat there. Again, this one has been very, very closely watched. This means that what remains outstanding for Democrats at this point is Virginia, where nobody was even expecting it to be a contest tonight. The Virginia Senate race right now still listed as too close to call between Democratic incumbent Mark Warner and Republican Ed Gillespie. But with North Carolina going to the Republicans, this does look like, as Chuck Todd said earlier, a wave. Chuck, I got to ask you, in terms of that, the late call on the Florida governor's race in relation to both other news agencies, but in particular in relation to Charlie Crist's announcement, right. What happens there?
Well, a little once bitten, twice shy. There's one of our boiler room guys said in 2004, Miami-Dade just found 300,000 votes after they called a race. So it's Florida. You're always a little bit careful when you don't know where ballots are. But it is, what's interesting there is Scott actually won by a larger margin than he did over Alex Sink. Now, just shows you not by much, and he invested so much money in a ground game and all of those things. But you got to wonder, Charlie Crist was just such a flawed candidate to have in there. He's now lost as a Republican, an independent, and a Democrat since 2010.
Yeah.
In that same period of time, Scott Walker's won 3 governor's races. He stayed a Republican the whole time. But Charlie Crist lost 3 different races at 3 different parties. I'm not surprised a swing voter said, at least I know where Rick Scott stands versus Charlie Crist. I don't know where he stands. That was always, to me, the bridge, the credibility gap that Charlie Crist was going to have to jump. But it just shows you Scott did need a little breeze at the end.
Let me ask you about
and they got the national wave.
You didn't get a chance to finish. Rachel was making some announcements, but let's talk about how this is going to be looked at nationally, winners, losers. Yeah. So the Democrats lost tonight. Who's going to get blamed? You said it's going to be Harry Reid, because I think it's very interesting. He never gave the more conservative Democrats a chance to show their independence, because he wouldn't let the votes come up on Keystone and things like that.
Well, there's going to be 2 types of blame games. There's going to be blame on the president. I mean, look, you can't. Every single race in the country was about Barack Obama. Sam Brownback was trying to make his governor's race about Barack Obama, okay? Everything, Obamacare was a Rick Scott, governor's races. So you're going to have that. And you're going to have, I think, second-guessing Democratic strategy. Should they have actually embraced some of Obama's policies and decided to at least try to keep them above water? That's one debate. But what Harry Reid did in trying to protect people from taking tough votes is he prevented Mark Pryor from being able to factually show he's a centrist. He prevented Mary Landrieu from being able to factually show she's a centrist. He prevented a Mark Udall from being able to cast some votes that are against the president. So I think they were so worried, and this goes to the whole, everything about the Democrats has been tactical in their campaigns. Harry Reid was tactical in how he ran the Senate. Mitch McConnell was no less tactical in sort of being the minority leader in the Senate. But you sort of wondered, were they so myopic that they sort of lost the big picture here a little bit?
I mean, you always lose whenever you play defense, right? And so, I mean, had Harry Reid run the Senate in such a way that Mark Pryor could have cast votes that made him look more independent on immigration or whatever it was, is that going to stop the attack ads against Mark Pryor for being for amnesty and for killing puppies and everything else it's going to be against. You can't defend yourself against attacks if you're not running on something that you have.
Well, they had no agenda. That's right. They did not run. We don't know what their economic agenda was. I mean, you look, if the top two issues were gridlock and the economy, the Republicans' answer to both of those was Obama. You know, Obama's economy is not working for rural America, and Obama is the one that's gridlock. The Democrats said, oh, those are the top two issues, we're going to talk about women. Those are the top two issues, we're going to try to talk to Hispanics. Those are the top two, and so I think there was a disconnect.
So we're going to get Kay Hagan giving her concession speech, which is basically the board has been run. Here she is.
Thank you so much for your friendship. Thank you for being here tonight. I've just called Speaker Tillis to congratulate him and to tell him we will work with him during this transition period. And I really first want to thank my fabulous husband, Chip. You know, it's been one of the greatest blessings in my life to have Chip with me, by my side, standing with me, as we really work for the values we hold dear in North Carolina. Chip, thanks for your unending support. I also want to thank my kids. The best, absolutely the best. And my baby grandson, Harrison.
Pardon the interruption, but as North Carolina incumbent Democratic Senator Kay Hagan makes her concession in North Carolina, there is another call to bring you. It's an interesting one. It's the Virginia Senate race. NBC News now projects that incumbent Democratic Senator Mark Warner is the apparent winner. You saw the language there. The apparent winner in the Virginia Senate race. Because NBC News political director Chuck Todd is here, I get to ask you what that means.
Okay, what it means is it's not outside a potential recount issue. We know there's some absentee ballots out that we assume are going to be Warner, but all of our modeling has Warner winning this. But again, I don't think Gillespie's going to, if I were him, I wouldn't concede tonight. You sort of wait to see what the morning looks like. It could be within recount range. And so that's why we don't have a way of seeing a model that ever has Warner not in the lead, but that's why we use apparent.
Okay, and it's less than 20,000 votes between them, with about 95% of the vote in. As you say, the models don't show a way that Gillespie can win.
Correct.
It's very, very
because
close.
of where the vote is out. But it's that close, and again, I wouldn't be surprised if Gillespie asked for a recount.
There is no automatic recount provision in Virginia. Gillespie would have to ask for it. But just fascinating outcome in Virginia. I should also tell you, by the way, of talking about what's happened in these Senate races. In the New Hampshire Senate, NBC News long ago projected that the winner of the New Hampshire Senate race would be the incumbent Democrat in New Hampshire, Jeanne Shaheen, defeating Scott Brown. Scott Brown, who moved from Massachusetts to New Hampshire specifically, it seems, to run in that race. NBC News projected that, and a lot of other news organizations projected that early in the night. Scott Brown, for a long time, though, was refusing to concede and making a lot of noise that he thought maybe he had not lost that race. That has now changed. Scott Brown, we're now told, has conceded that Senate race to Jeanne Shaheen, which does make him a famous person. Nobody else has ever lost two different Senate races to two different women. I'll keep saying it all night, because then I'll never have another opportunity to talk about Scott Brown ever again, until he runs to Maine and runs there. Kidding. We'll be right back. Kidding. If you love politics, you love nights like this, a historic night for the Republican Party as they run a lot of the table tonight in these 6-year midterm elections during the Barack Obama presidency. In terms of where we are right now with the Senate, let me give you a little bit of the lay of the land in terms of what has happened thus far tonight. In Virginia, NBC News has projected the apparent winner in a very close Senate race in Virginia. Mark Warner, the Democratic incumbent, projected to be the apparent winner over Ed Gillespie, the Republican candidate there. In North Carolina, the Senate race there, The projected winner is Tom Tillis, the Republican challenger to Democratic incumbent Kay Hagan. In the Georgia Senate race, we're also looking at a big win for the Republican Party, not only because David Perdue is projected to have beaten Michelle Nunn, but because he is projected to have beaten her outside the 50% margin that would have forced that race to a runoff in January. In Kentucky, the majority leader now of the United States Senate, majority leader to be, I should say, Mitch McConnell held on to his seat, defeated a challenge by Democrat Allison Lundergan Grimes. In Arkansas, Democratic incumbent Mark Pryor lost his seat tonight to Republican Congressman Tom Cotton in the state of Arkansas. That essentially looses the last Democratic hold in the state of Arkansas. The Colorado Senate race, another Democratic incumbent losing tonight, Mark Udall losing his seat to Republican Congressman Cory Gardner in Colorado. In Kansas, Pat Roberts had sort of the race of his life in Kansas, a place that nobody thought any Republican would have to run too hard, but tonight he did, in the end, defeat a challenge, a tough challenge from an independent named Greg Orman. In Iowa, this was the race that put the Republican Party over the top to control the United States Senate tonight. Republican Joni Ernst defeating Democratic Congressman Bruce Braley. In New Hampshire, as we were just discussing, incumbent Democrat Jeanne Shaheen holds on to her seat, beats off a challenge from Scott Brown, Republican challenger in New Hampshire who had previously been a Republican senator from Massachusetts. The Senate pickups tonight for the Republican Party: Arkansas, Colorado, Iowa, Montana, North Carolina, South Dakota, also West Virginia. At this hour, the state of the United States Senate. Republicans know they have 52 seats, with there could be more to come. Democrats, they have 44 seats plus 2 independents who have caucused with them in the past. Bernie Sanders certainly will continue to do so. Angus King will now be having some interesting conversations, I'm sure, with Republicans if he is so inclined. He'd been making some noise recently that he might be willing to consider caucusing with the Republican Party, and now Republicans will be the majority. In terms of governors, there's a bunch of races still outstanding. Fascinating. Blue State Maryland, too close to call between the Republican Larry Hogan and the serving Democratic Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown, a difference of about 85,000 votes with the Republican in the lead. This one considered by NBC News too close to call. Maine governor also too close to call. The incumbent Republican Paul LePage at 48%, Mike Michaud at 44%. About 3/4 of the vote is in Maine. That potential spoiler effect from the independent there, now a perpetual thing in Maine. Connecticut governor's race, a rematch of 2010 between a Democratic incumbent Dan Malloy and Republican Tom Foley. Difference of less than 10,000 votes between these two. But look, only 54% of the vote in Connecticut. Maybe a long night before we know what happened in Connecticut. Massachusetts governor, 84% of the vote in. It's too close to call between Martha Coakley and Charlie Baker, the Republican. We now have a winner that we can project in the Kansas governor's race. Sam Brownback has held on. The conservative Republican governor of Kansas, Sam Brownback, has beaten back a challenge from Democrat Paul Davis. Sam Brownback has been at the helm of a total Republican takeover in Kansas, but one that has not been without its controversies. A lot of Republicans crossed lines to support Paul Davis, the moderate Democrat who is running against Sam Brownback, but NBC News now projects that the winner will be Sam Brownback, re-elected in Kansas. In the Colorado governor's race, the incumbent there is a Democrat, John Hickenlooper. This one has now moved from too early to call to too close to call. The Republican challenger, former Congressman Bob Beaupre, he ran for governor not that long ago and lost by 17 points. But tonight, with 82% of the vote in Colorado, it's too close to call. In Vermont, Peter Shumlin, the Democratic governor, the incumbent is Peter Shumlin. Scott Milne, the Republican challenger, 45% to Peter Shumlin's 47%. You have to get 50% in order to win in Vermont. And I will ask Chuck Todd to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe at this point that means it goes to the legislature.
Correct. It's not even a runoff. The legislature will pick it. Shumlin will probably get picked at the Democratic legislature.
So wait, the runoff happens in the legislature?
No, there's no runoff. It's sort of like an electoral college of Vermont. And think of it that way. The Vermonters will decide. Ben and Jerry have no vote. But no, it's done in the legislature, and Shumlin will likely win on that. I mean, this is not. I
want to get to the. We've got our results in tonight. We know it looks like it is a sweep. You said it's a wave. It's a wave. I think we all agree that
turning into a large wave. Maryland Gov is a large wave.
And people are not going to be talking about Harry Reid 2 weeks from now or much about McConnell. It's going to be about the President of the United States. I want to hear from people who can tell me, you're the White House correspondent and you know the guy quite well. How is the president taking the news tonight, Robert?
Well, I mean, I think as Chuck said, when you look at a state like Maryland that is not just blue but fairly deep blue, about as blue as Michael Steele's shirt, and that's why he's grinning so in a large way. Look, the president, as I said earlier, is hugely competitive. We're not talking about Senate control now. We're talking about what the number will be for Republicans, right? We're way past. I mean, the brightest spots for Democrats tonight are Jeanne Shaheen by 11,000 votes and a Pennsylvania governor's race everyone knew was cooked a month ago. I think it is a...
Where else is there something?
Yeah, I think all the news...
Gwen Graham, Bob Graham's daughter...
We got some more news
winning, and that's about it.
To put the cap on this, here's the announcement of the night right now. This is the Maryland governor's race. NBC News is now projecting Larry Hogan is the next governor of Maryland in a state that is essentially Democrat, as you know. Let's come back to your point there. How does the president not read this as a rejection of his name, of his party, of his agenda? How does he not read that?
Well, I think the two things. I mean, obviously, there were a huge number of these races in very red places, right? And essentially, Republicans won control in red places, added to that in a big way by winning 3 of the 4 purple Senate races. Look, I think it's going to be an interesting press conference at the White House tomorrow. I was there in 2010 when we, I will say this, the word shellacking has been taken. But no, I think this is, as Chuck said, a big wave. Maryland's a big wave.
Steve, one of your leaders of the future, Rand Paul, and I don't mean that sarcastically, says your party brand sucks. It doesn't look like it sucks tonight.
Well, look, this is a rejection of the president and his policies, not a buy-in to the Republican agenda, simply because we didn't have much of an agenda other than asking people to vote against the president in race after race. I do think one of the interesting aspects in the immediate future, and I say this as someone who has been a longtime advocate of immigration reform, I don't think it's possible for Republicans to be a national party getting 27% of the Hispanic vote. We need to get 40% in order to win. I will say this after this election, the notion that the President of the United States, by administrative fiat, by executive order, is going to wipe away the nation's immigration laws and legalize 7 million people plus by executive order, I think would be an extraordinarily provocative act, incredibly divisive. And I think that this is an issue that is immediately in front of the new Congress, potentially in the lame deck by the president. And I think his actions in that space will very much set the tone for the remaining 2 years of the administration. Will he act in a conciliatory way?
Is that a deal breaker?
Or not?
Is that going to make sure, if he goes out there and does it by fiat, basically by EO, and he legalizes X many people, millions of people, and basically says, I don't need a bill from you guys. I'm going to do it myself by power of, he does have that parole power. He'll just do it. Does that mean no more deals? Is that an end to the game?
What deals? Into what?
I'm asking.
Well, I suspect it is. I think we live in a constitutional republic, and what that is, in my view, is Caesarism. The president doesn't have that authority. It is a grotesque overreach of the executive authority. And again, I say that as someone who believes that the Hastert rule in the House is pernicious, that the votes exist in the House to pass immigration reform, but the way that we change immigration laws in this country is through the legislative process, not by administrative fiat. And you don't change the immigration laws by saying, hey, we're frustrated with the process because we can't get something through. And this was the point that Chris was making earlier. The issue with the immigration bill, the Republicans certainly, we have our fair share of blame, again, as an advocate for it, but the president has not been able to get this done from a leadership perspective and has accountability in that space.
I have to say, though, for how much I've enjoyed talking to you about this over the years and how much I think that you're right about this in terms of your personal politics, I think you're out over your skis in terms of what the president has done and whether it's Caesarism. I mean, the president hasn't done anything, nor has the president talked specifically about what he's going to do, nor has he talked ever about changing laws, nor could he do so legally. Well, so the president's talking about what's within his administrative power to do. He says that's the limits of what he's going to consider. Politically, yes.
Here, I think
legally,
tonight,
and whether or not he's a dictator,
correct.
Come on.
No. I hear you that legally he could do some of the things he wants to do here. I think politically tonight, it put an end to it.
Yeah.
I don't think, because it would be a provocative act politically. The country, in many ways... No
matter what he does?
On this front, I think that you have a Republican Party who, while I think a lot of them want to work with him on tax policy, trade, there's some things I think you'll see. I think they think that immigration will tear their own party apart. And I think that they will feel they have to confront the president here. What I'm saying is the president is going to know that if he does this, he is starting a war, political war in Washington between the White House and a Republican Congress.
Yeah.
He'd be I'm not. I understand what you're saying, that you can be technically, legally correct. It would just start a political war.
Nothing has changed in terms of the politics of immigration in Washington.
Yes.
The Republican Party was blocking it before from the minority in the Senate and from the majority in the House. They will continue to do so. The president has said, I'm going to act within my administrative power to do what I can, even though I know nothing can pass Congress. Still nothing can pass Congress. He's made this promise. If he breaks it, every Latino in the country has every reason to believe that Democrats have been lying to them all
Delaying it. He shouldn't have delayed it, though.
He shouldn't have delayed it. He did.
But that's another argument.
I think by delaying
numbers in the Senate
conceding that this election
I think that you may have a point in terms of delaying it, but I think that when we have heard nothing different from the president to start talking tonight about Caesarism, yes, there's been a way. A lot of us, including me, didn't want to believe that would happen. But first of all, we don't know whether the Republicans are going to be intoxicated by their victory tonight and overstep the runway here. We don't know what's going on. And it's very possible that the war can be declared by the Republicans. The president has not said anything different than he said before, and if he operates within his administrative powers and doesn't over-push the envelope, and the Republicans become too zealous, I think that you could see a different kind of politics.
But
let me start talking about Caesar tonight, I think it's very premature.
If I could just real quick, there are two checks to what was just said and to what you said, Rachel. The first check is what happened tonight. The country has given the United States Senate to the Republican Party.
Right.
All right? That is a check on the president. Whether he likes it or not, it is a political check on the president. So he has to honor that check, to Chuck's point. He has to honor that check because, in other words, they want him, the country wants him to figure out a way to work with them. The check on Republicans is that in 2 years, we're going to be sitting around this table with a lot of blue in play for Republicans. Yeah. They want to keep the Senate. They're going to now have to govern, which means they're going to have to figure out a way to work with the president on immigration, on a host of other issues. And so I think that's going to be the that's not
going to be the way they do it. They don't want to govern. They want to make it look like Washington is broken, so people hate Obama all the more. So they vote against Obama.
But Obama's not.
Let's make a prediction here.
Don't make him on the ballot.
I want to know
this time either.
I want to know what the president's going to do first before we analyze it.
Let me try to wrap this up because I think one thing we can all agree on is there has to be pretty early tomorrow morning a sequencing conversation in the White House. At some point tomorrow, the president will walk into the East Room and give a traditional press conference after an election and talk about working with the Senate, working with the new Senate. Right? And I do think there's going to have to be a sequencing conversation because if the message is, I want to work with you, here are some ideas and some things we can do, there's going to be some different conversation that has to be had. You can't just turn around in 3 weeks and wave a wand. There will be a lot of sequencing in this because I do believe Michael's right, and Republicans are going to have to decide something. They can't. I'll make this prediction, and it's not far out on a limb. If they don't fix their Hispanic voting problems in 2 years, they will be in charge of Congress for a long, long time, and they will only be invited to meetings at the White House. They will not control the White House because since George W. Bush in 2004, each candidate, John McCain, a huge supporter of comprehensive immigration reform, then Mitt Romney got less and less Hispanic votes. There has to be, from Republicans, some fix to this. Now, a lot of fear in their caucus. They saw Eric Cantor. They saw others. And so there are going to be discussions that have to happen inside the Republican Party and discussions that happen inside the White House. And we won't know the outcome of this, I think, for a little while.
I want to go straight to North Carolina right now. Tom Tillis defeated incumbent Senator Kay Hagan to take her Senate seat in North Carolina. Here's Tom Tillis in his victory speech.
I tell you what, though, I'm sure y'all been watching the ads, but there was something very, very important that also had to happen tonight. And we have swept this nation with a compelling Senate majority. So somehow I think Senator Reid's going to have a different office assignment come January. So, I think at the end of the day, I think the reason they spent all that money is that they looked at North Carolina. They knew what we had here. We had hundreds and hundreds of volunteers absolutely committed, calling, knocking on doors, doing what we had to do to win. Y'all refused to lose, and that's why I'm standing here before you.
In terms of our propositions tonight, the ones that we've been keeping an eye on in terms of national impact, in Oregon, they have voted to legalize the sale and possession of marijuana. Right now, 54 to 46%, with about 2/3 of the vote in Oregon. But the legalized sale and possession of marijuana passes in the state of Oregon. It did not meet the threshold it needed to meet for medical marijuana in Florida. We'll be watching Alaska later on tonight to find out if it passes there as well. And there are these two interesting dueling initiatives on guns in Washington state. One which would prohibit background checks and one which would mandate background checks. The one that prohibited background checks lost tonight, 55 to 45. Now flip over to the other one. The one that would have mandated background checks, that one passed. And so gun control advances thanks to a pair of purposefully conflicting propositions on the Washington ballot tonight.
So we hear that Cory Gardner is going to give a victory speech right now in New Jersey. Can we go right now to that?
Oh, in Colorado.
Oh, that Gardner. I think it was Cory Booker. It's Cory Gardner. I like the other Cory better, but let's go to this guy.
We shook up the Senate. You shook up the Senate. Your message was heard from Nevada to Pennsylvania Avenue. As Republicans in Colorado, we've gotten used to the saying, wait until the next election. Well, I've got news for you. That next election, it finally happened. A few minutes ago, I spoke with Senator Udall, and I thanked him for his incredible commitment to public service and the sacrifices that he and his family have made in the name of making Colorado a better place, and our commitment together to work for a smooth transition. Nine months ago, in Boulder, I stood before you to accept the nomination for United States Senate. It was there that we realized together the great challenge that we would face to get to this day. Saying then, we have signed up to be the tip of the spear, the vanguard of the movement that is sweeping our nation to pick the shackle of gridlock and to fundamentally change the dysfunction of Washington, D.C. And we have indeed reached that historic day. We have realized the success of that movement. The people of Colorado, voters around this state, had their voices heard. They are not red. They are not blue, but they are crystal clear in their message to Washington, D.C. Get your job done and get the heck out of the way. Tomorrow we go to work to fix a Washington that is out of step, out of touch, and out of time. Tonight, Colorado indeed became the fulcrum of the balance of power. Tonight, we commit ourselves to building a government we can be proud of again. A government that solves big problems because leaders have the courage to lead, to unite those voices who, while they may not have voted with the victor tonight, recognize the need to find common solutions, an altogether uncommon notion in Washington. I will work each and every day for every person in Colorado to find those solutions, not for party or politics, but for you, the people of Colorado. I am convinced that we won this election because we asked Coloradans to lift their eyes to that great Rocky Mountain horizon, to look ahead to a future that is brighter than our present. Ours is a forever young state with an ever hopeful attitude. All of us are here tonight because we believe there is something exceptional about our state and our nation. We believe in courageous ideas and bold beliefs. We believe in the power of optimism, of the American story, a belief that isn't electioneering, but enduring, a generational commitment to be better tomorrow than we are today. The moral compulsion to give our children and grandchildren a better starting point than the one we inherited from our parents and our grandparents. And I say we can fix this nation's problems together. We can build a stronger economy together. We can achieve energy independence together. We can improve education together. And we can protect our incredible environment together. Because tonight, the people of Colorado sent a message that is what is happening in Washington isn't working, and it has to stop. That our country expects and deserves better than what it is getting. That leaders shouldn't stop at the status quo and think they deserve a pat on the back. It was not a message for Republicans tonight or against Democrats, but a warning to all who fail to courageously act on our nation's greatest challenges. Over 200 years ago, people came to this great nation wondering how we became who we are. How did this ragtag nation of farmers, planters, mercantilists defeat the greatest nation on the face of this earth? And it was because each and every one of us has a passion in our hearts to rise. A passion to rise and be better, to imagine a great nation, imagine a great economy, to imagine together a nation that rises. Thanks to all of you who made this night possible. And thank you to my family.
Okay, that's, of course, U.S. Congressman Cory Gardner, who defeated incumbent Democratic Senator Mark Udall out in Colorado tonight. The Huffington Post, Howard Fineman is with he's got some new information about the presidential landscape for 2016. Boy, we're moving quickly into the future, Howard. We were just arguing about the lame duck, and you're taking us right to 16. Well, what do you know?
Well, what I know is that the Republican victories in the governor's races around the country, especially in blue states, are exciting Republicans a lot tonight, and I think with good reason. As Rachel was mentioning earlier, I mean, you're looking not only at Illinois going to the Republicans in the governorship, Wisconsin staying with the Republicans, Connecticut, possibly Massachusetts, Maryland, as you say, a blue state if there ever was one. This is an indication of what the ground game is going to be like and what the playing field is going to be like in 2016, because there are 18 states in the District of Columbia that form the big blue wall for Democrats, in which they have 242 electoral votes just starting out with that group of states that regularly vote Democrat. Now you've got a situation of the Republicans taking governorships in some of those places, showing, I think, a chance and an excitement that they've got to really compete strongly in states they need to get to break through. Illinois is big, and there's no mistake about it. The notion that, I don't know whether we've called the race in Massachusetts yet, but the fact that Charlie Baker's ahead there is really significant.
We haven't called it yet.
Okay, been really interesting. Connecticut, Maryland, the overwhelming defeat of a Democrat in Maryland. You can put that down to Anthony Brown's weakness as a candidate if you want, but I think it means a lot more than that. And on some of the Senate races, the fact that Mark Warner barely survived in Virginia, a state that sort of under Barack Obama became a part of the Democratic coalition, I think is a warning to Democrats heading into 2016. And yes, go ahead.
Let's talk about audacity, which is really the key to politics. The ego, the person who's willing to run the race, they can't win, but they do win.
Right.
Maryland, Virginia, New Hampshire, audacity. Ed Gillespie's going to beat Mark Warner. You got to be kidding me. Yet that's about 49-49.
Right.
You're kidding me that a Republican's going to be governor of Maryland? You mean, you're kidding me that a guy can move from one state to the next? He can't even vote there hardly. He shows up and says, I can run anywhere. Audacity. It seems to me the Democrats don't have a whole lot of audacity. And in the end, the party that does have it tends to win, ultimately, because you keep going on offense and the other party's playing defense.
Right.
Talk about that.
Well, Chris, I think that the Republicans were invited to be audacious this year because of the weakness of the president, because of his lousy poll numbers, because of the general sour mood about the economy generally, even though there's been some progress on the economy. So you get a guy like Ed Gillespie, who, after all, spent most of his life as an insider, you know, as a lesser figure than Steve Schmidt, but still an insider in Republican politics. He runs. Imagine Steve Schmidt running for the Senate, you know, out there. I think it could have been done if he wanted to do it this year, because that's the kind of year it was. A year in which people are discussing.
Was it that big a Republican year? That big? That would be a wave. That would be a tsunami.
I said Rick Scott has broken down all sorts of barriers to bald guys.
If you ran, I would run your campaign. That's how big
I think we would all run Steve's campaign. But the point is, in this atmosphere, this kind of sulfurous atmosphere, and especially with the president being as weak as he was politically, it's going to invite Republicans to take chances. It's going to invite Scott Brown to mosey on across the border from Massachusetts to New Hampshire. It's going to invite Ed Gillespie, one of the ultimate insiders, to run an outsider's campaign in Virginia. How audacious was that? And he almost pulled it off. I think you've seen that all over the country by Republicans, because they're feeling feisty right now, because Mitch McConnell's strategy of basically locking up Washington and then blaming it on the president has worked brilliantly. I mean, and that's the story.
One last question.
Sure.
I'll take one answer.
Yes.
Which party has the spark right now?
Oh, the Republican Party, for sure. The Dems have to reinvent themselves all over again. The Obama era is over.
Thanks very much, Howard Feynman, my friend, for heading up the Huffington Post Media Group. Let's bring in our colleague, Lawrence O'Donnell, who's, well, he's looking at the new United States Senate because he's an expert at it. Let's get back to this. There was a very hot discussion here a few moments ago about how, not to use the same word, how audacious the president's going to be when he comes back after this election, and how wild he's going to get in terms of executive orders on immigration. Will he go all the way or part way or whatever? Even if it provokes the Congress. Do you think he has to tread softly, or are they separate questions? If he wants to get something done in economic growth, which is the key to his future, does he have to be careful or not?
Well, we saw this once before, Chris, this kind of shift under a Democratic president. Bill Clinton, 1994, he in one night lost both a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate. And I can tell you what was going on in the White House the next day was simply shock. The White House did not know what to do next. We went up there very soon after that election, different groups from the Hill. And the basic thing we wanted to know, the basic message we wanted to get from the president is, what will you veto? Tell us what your veto lines are, where the line is for you on a category of possible legislation. And the White House couldn't do it. Bill Clinton couldn't do it. I think the president tonight, never having worked with a Republican Senate before, there isn't really a way for this White House to know tomorrow morning when they wake up how they're going to deal with this Senate. The president is going to have to meet one-on-one with Mitch McConnell. It's going to have to be a meeting unlike any he's ever had with Mitch McConnell. He's going to have to really try to see if there is a way to find the man of government that Mitch McConnell used to be 20 years ago. That may be impossible now, to see if he can reach into this new Senate Majority Leader and do some business with him, and do one very important piece of business right off the bat. He has to say to the Senate Majority Leader, look, this country is very soon not going to have an Attorney General. We have to confirm an Attorney General. You, Mitch McConnell, have to confirm an Attorney General. He's going to have to work very directly with Mitch McConnell on how to get that done. That will be the very first public test of just how responsibly Mitch McConnell wants to run the United States Senate.
I want to run that right by Rob Gibbs. Rob, do you think the president ever really sits down and has a heart-to-heart with the other side, or does he have these highly choreographed meetings of 12 people at the Jefferson Hotel so he doesn't have to get personal with anybody?
Well, I think after tonight it has to be pretty heartfelt, maybe not one-on-one, but maybe a group of 3 or 4 Republican Republican and Democratic leaders. I mean, look, I think we're coming into a brave new world tomorrow.
Yeah.
And look, I think it's going to be fascinating on a whole number of levels. Molly Ball had a great piece in The Atlantic about a week ago where she covered Pat Roberts, and Pat Roberts said, vote for me because I'll stop Obama and we'll start getting something done in the Senate. And she wrote about the fact that those are two completely incongruent statements to make next to each other in a speech. So you've got a Democratic president that wants to do some things to add to his legacy, to continue to see the economy grow. But you've also got Republicans who now, not only do they have to govern, but I think they have to show the American people they have the ability to get something done.
Yeah.
They have to, or we're going to find, because the one thing, again, we need to be clear about is, and I think Republicans and Democrats can agree on this, is what happened tonight is not an indication or a prediction about what will happen in 2 years. And for the Republicans to have a night like tonight in 2016 is going to require of them getting something done. They've got to change something about the gridlock. You're shaking your head, but I'm telling you.
No, I'm trying to figure out because I want.
No, you're not. Chris is.
No, I just don't think. I think the Republican tactical. The tactical decision, which is to obstruct, has been basically quite politically beneficial, and it's unclear to me why that changes. I mean, because
if they shut down the government, guess what your reward is?
Well, you know, what's the point of encouraging that crap, though? What's the point?
But I'm not encouraging or not. I'm not making. I'm just saying.
It sounds like you're saying that's effective politics.
Well, but I am saying it from a purely political standpoint, right? There are two big decisions that were made. One was, do you pass comprehensive immigration reform? And the voices in the party that said, if we pass it, we will get no credit for it. The president will. If we block it, hopefully the blame gets divided equally. They were right. They blocked it. They won the political game.
But they still have the monkey in their back.
Let's shut down the government.
It's still their problem.
The group of people that said, let's shut down the government. They shut down the government, and all the people tut-tutted and said, this is terrible, and look at what kind of night we're having.
Well, maybe somebody will agree with me here. I think both parties gained from a deal on immigration. Both parties gained. The Republicans, like, they used to have this problem with Social Security. Cut the deal, get it behind you. At some point, they got to make a deal that lets people who have been in this country for many years to become officially American. There's no other purpose than to do that. There's no other long-term policy that makes any sense except to do that.
Jose Diaz-Balart in Miami right now, actually. I think we should bring in on this. Jose has been focusing on the immigration politics here. What's likely and what both parties calculate on this? Jose, what do you think?
Good evening. I agree with Chris on this one. I think it's beneficial to both parties if some immigration reform comes out of Washington in the near future. Clearly, the president has been saying since day one that he supports immigration reform. It would be beneficial to this country on an economic factor. It would also help the economy, but it would also help this country. You know, the fact is that he has not been able to do that. The president promised, for example, that by the end of the summer he would take executive action on immigration because the House of Representatives did not. They punted on it. And this decision to wait until after the elections may have cost the Democrats, specifically in Colorado, because less Latinos turned out to vote for Democrats. Let's think of this. In 2012, President Obama received 87% of the Colorado Latino vote. And some indications are that Mr. Udall got about 71%. That's a pretty substantial drop in the number of Latino support for Democrats. I think the president needs to get this as a legacy issue, and I think that it would be beneficial to Republicans as well.
Jose, I got to ask you a really tough question, and it really is tough. I look at the Senate bill as a balanced bill. It's got 12 Republicans behind it. It has good opportunities for people to become citizens, a road to citizenship, which we'll all believe in, who's reasonable about this thing for both compassion and American reasons. We want people to be Americans. It also has a tough stuff, teeth in it, which Simpson Mazzoli never had 20-some years ago, 30-some years ago. It really does make it hard to hire people illegally. It kills the magnet of cheap illegal labor in this country. It makes it, you have to be papered. It has to be official from now on. So why doesn't the president say, instead of making the positive argument, put some of the tough teeth out there and sell the teeth? What do you Republicans want? There's teeth in this bill. What more do you want? Push it at them. Don't make it look like you're the softy and they're the hard guy. Say, this is a tough-ass bill. This is tough. Why don't you guys sign it? What more do you want here? I'd be much
billions of dollars to go to the border. I mean, billions of dollars of additional money to go to the border.
Look, any one of us would get across the border if we needed a job. I mean, this idea the border, higher buildings and more guns is ridiculous. Deportations is ridiculous. The whole thing, it's all economics. People come here. If it's legal to come here, as guest workers or short-term or whatever we set it up like, or make it easier to come here. But the fact is, we can regulate our border effectively. We can do it compassionately, and something that we'd be proud to do. But we don't want to do it. It seems like I still have a problem with the president on this. I think he's been using the issue, and it's hurting with your community because they don't believe he's delivering. At some point, he's got to go from the issue to the bill. When's the bill going to pass? And when's he going to bring it to the Republicans and force them to deal with it in the House?
How could he make John Boehner pass it? How could he make John Boehner
You got to try.
He got it through the Senate?
It's the way our Constitution works. That's why.
When you try and they say no, then what do you do?
I think that one of the defining issues of our time in our politics is the total collapse of trust in very nearly every institution in the country, which extends beyond the government, beyond the political parties, beyond the candidates, to business. You name a big institution, it's lost the trust of the American people. So we talk about the 1994 election, and we talk about Bill Clinton in the Republican Congress. I think it's important to remember that was a time of peace and prosperity in this country. The country faces actual, real, serious challenges right now, tonight, and the American people, broadly speaking, in this election have just rendered a verdict that is essentially, we feel like the wheels are about to come off. And they are anxious, they are upset, they are in a bad mood, and they don't believe that the leaders of either party, judging by any poll, have the capacity to actually govern the country. So for the president, I think it's his obligation now to answer the hand that Mitch McConnell extended tonight, and to show the American people that they have the capacity to govern the country and to lead in a time of real crisis. We look at the threat of ISIS. We look at the Ebola epidemic, though off of the front pages of a lot of American newspapers and diminishing in coverage, is a worsening epidemic, actually, out across the world. So these very serious challenges, I think, demand a level of seriousness from the national leaders, and it'll be very interesting to see which side is able to get up on the high ground of reasonableness. But for sure, the zero-sum notion that I win, you lose, both sides, by working together, I think you're exactly right, have every capacity to rise together.
I think that is hopeful on policy grounds. On tactical grounds, I got to say Republicans have been rewarded for making sure that nothing passes. But I got to say right now, actually, we have to note the fact that there are 4 big races that are still outstanding tonight, even before we get to the polls closing in Alaska in about 19 minutes. Oh, wow. Right now, there are outstanding races for governor in Maine, in Connecticut, in Colorado, and in Massachusetts. We're going to be talking with Steve Kornacki about what's going on in some of those races right now. But we've got 4 outstanding governor's races. Tomorrow morning in the Boston Globe, we've already seen what the front page of the Boston Globe is going to look like. They're not calling it between Charlie Baker and Martha Coakley either. But we'll get some of those numbers and some further detail ahead of the next poll closings when we come back. Of Maine Republican Governor Paul LePage. In the Maine governor's race tonight, NBC is still calling this race too close to call, with 81% of the vote in. But in the Maine governor's race, we're just told that Paul LePage, the Republican incumbent, has declared victory, and Mike Michaud, the Democrat, has conceded this race. Again, the factor here that everybody knew was probably going to be decisive is the presence of that third candidate, the independent Elliott Cutler, who also played such an important role in that race in 2010. We do have a new call in a governor's race, though. This is a big one. NBC News projects that the winner in the Massachusetts governor's race is Republican Charlie Baker. This is a Republican pickup. Outgoing governor is Deval Patrick, the Democrat. Martha Coakley was trying to succeed him as a Democrat, but Charlie Baker is now projected to win the Massachusetts governor's race. Again, in Maine, we've got a race that is not being called by NBC News, but Paul LePage is declaring victory. Mike Michaud has conceded. In Colorado and Connecticut, NBC both considering both of those races too close to call. As these last few get sorted out, let's talk to Steve Kornacki here about what we know about these races right now. Again, the call right now from NBC on Massachusetts. No call yet in these other three.
Yeah, well, I'll start on Massachusetts, and I think there's a pretty good reason they did this. What you can see is that Charlie Baker now has climbed ahead by 30,000 votes. When you look at what's outstanding, there just aren't really any Democratic areas that are left. The two biggest places that are left on the map are Haverhill and Attleboro. These are mid-sized bedroom communities. These are strong Republican towns, so you just can't see where Coakley's going to make it up. I think what the Coakley people were waiting on here is the Massachusetts state law says that if you're within half a point, you then can request a recount. You have 10 days to do that. Baker, though, in the last hour has seen this lead climb from a fraction of a point to over 1 point. So not only does it look like he's going to finish ahead of her, it also looks like he'll be above that half-a-point threshold. So that's the reason I think that that's happening. When you look in Maine, now Maine's a difficult state. It's you have these rural areas, you have these outlying areas. But let's take a look here. We don't have the map, but I can explain very quickly what happened, why this has happened tonight. In Maine, there's a very clear sort of cultural, geographic divide between the rural northern part of the state and southern Maine, which in many ways can be a Boston suburb. The shocking thing that has happened in this race tonight is that Paul LePage in southern Maine, there are communities in southern Maine that you would expect him to be getting clobbered in. If you know Saco, Maine, Scarborough, Maine, even in Portland, the numbers maybe not quite as overwhelming there as the Democrats were hoping for. So the Democrats just did not dominate in southern Maine like they needed to here. And I can just tell you the one silver lining in New England right now for Democrats, if I go back out to the map, Connecticut's outstanding as we speak. Dan Malloy, the Democratic incumbent there, trying to hang on, and you can see a very close race in Connecticut at this hour. The good news for Democrats, he's about 1,000 votes behind, but I'm just going to, places where votes are outstanding right now include Hartford, East Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport. These are some very Democratic areas. There are some Republican areas in Fairfield County that are out as well, but Democrats have a path, at least, in Connecticut. So that's the story in New England right now, and I can't resist. I have to share with you one statistic from New England. If you're looking for a silver lining, if you're a Democrat tonight on this very tough night for Democrats, it would be this. In the state of Massachusetts, there are 9 congressional races tonight. All 9 of them went to the Democrats. That means that in the last 100 individual congressional races in Massachusetts, Democrats are now 100-0. So even in this brutal climate tonight, that streak survives.
All right, and so that says something about the Massachusetts congressional delegation, but Massachusetts goes back to a Republican governor. Gene Robinson, thanks for being with us tonight. Let me get your reaction to that.
Well, Martha Coakley loses again, apparently. So, this whole evening really is shellacking the sequel. I said earlier on NBC, before all these numbers came in, that I wasn't sure it was a wave. No, this is a wave. You lose the Maryland governor's race. You lose in states where you shouldn't be losing, and so it's more than just, I think, the referendum that Republicans wanted on President Obama, on the way you feel about things right now, because the Democratic Party comes out of this looking tired and almost exhausted, and I think it's a real mistake for Democrats to assume that in 2016 they can so easily recreate the coalition that President Obama created in 2008 and 2012, and energize and fire up minorities and women and younger voters in that very special way. They might not be able to do that.
Let's talk about that without being final about anything, because nothing's final. Martha Coakley has suffered from the notion that she's Boston, she's a bit elite, and the other people these guys run against her. I'm more of a guy. I drive a truck. I'm more west of Boston. You know the area. They try to sell it. But Hillary Clinton was very popular when she ran up there as sort of somebody who did identify with the working class people, if you will. I hate the phrase, but regular people, right? Yeah. She never had the elite tarnish up there. So what's the difference between her and Martha Coakley? Oakley does have this problem of people saying she's not one of us.
Well, Elizabeth Warren romped in Massachusetts.
Yeah, she did. She had a different kind of image. Well, she's some work. But nobody ever accused her of being elitist.
You raise Hillary Clinton, and that's an interesting point, because Hillary Clinton, as we have seen over the years, does have that sort of appeal. She's able to talk to kinds of voters that Barack Obama is not able to talk to. Now, but can she assemble the rest of that coalition? Can she really inspire the people that the president inspired in his 2 campaigns? And that's a question. I mean, maybe she can. I'm not. But who else could do it if she could?
There's so much going on. There's the Denver Post endorsing Cory Gardner, the Des Moines Register endorsing Ernst. There's something weird going on among even the educated crowd that surprises me. I can't figure.
You were going to jump in on the Massachusetts governor there.
Yeah, I was just going to say I think Martha Coakley is one of the worst candidates we've seen repeatedly, and if you think Scott Brown could have chosen to run against her instead of Jeanne Shaheen, there's a little bit of irony there. But I mean, I think the broader point that you're making here is pretty close to the mark. I mean, I think you saw a lot of Democrats in some of these close races take these key groups for granted, whether it was women, whether it was African-American voters. The question was all about, how do we turn these people out? In Colorado, you saw it was essentially, how do we turn women off of Cory Gardner? And that tactic at the end of the day just it wasn't enough.
Mark Uterus, that kind of comment.
Well, right, and it could be that the voters who were being targeted, figured, and probably correctly, that these Republicans are conservative and weird, but they're not actually going to do all this stuff. They're not going to do what.
That's the key. The key point is that you have to have some faith that there's some causal connection between who you vote for and what those people will do. And when that gets severed, right, what you end up voting is your discontent. And we've seen serial waves of discontent because right now, and for a long time, let's remember, the economy, this recovery has not delivered for the vast majority of voters. It has not.
I think also, as somebody once said, that a squirrel is a rat in nice packaging.
Right.
They're very similar if you look at them closely, but they're more cuddly. And let's face it, Gardner has been able to do that.
Squirrels, okay.
Well, don't feed them, but at a distance. Anyway, I had a better point to make a minute, but we'll be right back. We'll be right back with another look at the exit point to try to explain this in a more literal fashion, in fact, a more literary fashion. This is MSNBC's live coverage. Yes, it is, at almost 1 o'clock in the morning on election night. Back into this.
The squirrel lobby will be back here with us, yelling at us for a minute. At this point, the Republicans have taken 7 seats in the Senate, but we still don't know what's going to happen with the Alaska Senate seat currently held by Mark Begich. We're about to have Alaska poll closings in 2.5 minutes. In terms of what else is outstanding right now, we're still waiting for a call on the Connecticut governor's race, the Colorado governor's race, and the Maine governor's race. In Maine, they seem to be acting like that is over. NBC News is not yet calling the Maine governor's race between Mike Michaud and Republican incumbent Paul LePage. So we're watching those last few governor's races, Connecticut, Maine, and Colorado, and we are waiting on Alaska poll closings, a Senate race there, a governor's race there, plus interesting ballot measures on both legalizing marijuana and on raising the minimum wage in Alaska. That's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. Minimum wage passing everywhere else it's been on the ballot tonight. We'll be right back with that in just a moment. Welcome back to our live election coverage here on MSNBC. The polls have just closed in Alaska. I live for these words. The Alaska Senate race right now, NBC News is calling this too early to call between incumbent Democratic Senator Mark Begich and his Republican challenger Dan Sullivan. There's also a tight Alaska governor's race that we've been watching very close. Right now, the NBC News projection in the Alaska governor's race is that this one is also too early to call. The Republican incumbent there is Sean Parnell. He's running against an independent named Bill Walker. He had previously been running against both an independent and a Democrat. The independent and the Democrat decided to form a unity ticket to run against Sean Parnell. Interestingly, the independent and Democratic unity ticket, endorsed by Sarah Palin, even though Sean Parnell was her Republican lieutenant governor. In terms of other undecided races at this hour, Connecticut governor. This is still a race that's being called too close to call. Look at that, less than 2/3 of the vote counted yet in Connecticut. Dan Malloy, the Democratic incumbent, facing Republican Tom Foley. Also the Colorado governor's race. This one being called too close to call. 85% of the vote in. Republican former Congressman Bob Beaupre narrowly leading John Hickenlooper, the Democratic incumbent, but again, 85% of the vote there, and that's too close to call in Colorado. Another governor's race, which I should have mentioned earlier when I was talking about the outstanding races, the Hawaii governor's race, with just over 1/3 of the vote in. The Democrat David Ige, who ousted Neil Abercrombie, the sitting governor, in a Democratic primary this year. Right now, he's at 53% over Duke Aona, who's the Republican, but this is being called too early to call in Hawaii. So we've got a number of races that are still outstanding. One of the things that I'm going to be watching for in Alaska is to see what happens with minimum wage. Minimum wage has passed now. Raising the minimum wage has passed everywhere that they've put it on the ballot since the year 2000. We're up to more than a dozen of those now. Also, Alaska may legalize pot tonight, and not just legalizing medical marijuana. They may be
the full Colorado deal.
The full Colorado, the full Washington, and now the full Oregon, which also voted to legalize pot tonight. It'll be interesting to see both if that passes and by what kind of margin, if that does anything to turnout. I should mention also D.C. Washington, D.C. also voted tonight on legalizing pot. It passed in D.C. Now the question
That's adorable.
is whether or not Congress allows them to make their own law. The second-class citizens of Washington, D.C.
Let's bring in Tamron Hall with a look at our exit polling. Our last call of the night from Tamron. Thank you.
Hey there, guys. So many people have asked what's behind this wave tonight. Why did the Republican Party fare so well? Our NBC News exit poll tells us that there were 3 big factors, Chris, driving this outcome. Let's look at the first factor here. Republicans across the country, as you discussed on the panel, tried to tie the Democratic opponent to President Obama and his policies, and it seems to have worked here. The president's approval at this point, 44% in 2014. That is down 10 points from when the president won re-election only 2 years ago. Now, voters were also negative about government in general. Look at these numbers. A majority, 54%, said the government is doing too much, taking on things better left to businesses and individuals. And the third reason that we found in our exit poll information, the GOP did so well because of the economy, and it's still weighing on the minds of so many people. Of course, it was a rough situation in 2008 with the Great Recession, but the sentiment right now, still a lot of negativity, with 70% saying the economy is not in good shape. So there you have, Chris, food for thought. 3 reasons from the exit poll information, the data we received from the voters who came out and voted today.
Thank you, Tamara, for that late report. Now, let me go to Maria. You seem ready to talk about that. But that's a conservative message. This time, it's a conservative electorate.
Right.
It's a midterm electorate with a conservative message.
Exactly right. But I think one of the stories that will be able to unfold a little bit more, and Reverend, you can talk a little about this. This is the very first time that we have an election where the Voting Rights Act has been stripped. And what are those consequences? I was in Gainesville, Florida, a week and a half ago, where 50,000 students on campus, on the University of Florida, their voting booth had been eliminated. What is that going to do when we actually start talking about voting lines, how long, the time tax, everything? This is I think this is a topic that we're going to have to unpack much more further, but it's an opportunity for us to really have a conversation of, yes, it was definitely your usual midterm white Republican older voters that went out to vote, but it was also the very first time that you didn't have the Voting Rights Act in effect.
Reverend?
No, I think that you're going to have any number of factors. But the first thing is we should not be in denial. We lost tonight. There was a wave. Now, why? I think we will have to unpack, as Maria said. I think the Voting Rights Act is a part. I think that a lot of the running away from the president is a part. I think a lot of the economy is a part. Because none of these races, in my opinion, the critical ones, were that huge a gap in terms of the vote that you couldn't factor in a lot of things. They're very close races for the most part. I think a couple of them were huge gaps or big gaps, but for the most part, they were close enough that any one of these things could be factored in. The real question is going to be how the Democrats respond to that, because the Democrats, in my opinion, were not as aggressive as they should have been on voting rights. They He certainly wasn't aggressive on defending a lot of the president's policies. And does the Republicans overplay their hand? If I were a betting man, and I'm not, I would bet tonight that some of the zealots in the party are going to see this as a license to drive a winning car over the cliff.
Did you catch the language used by Cory Gardner in his victory speech? I am the tip of the spear.
Yes.
That's not exactly let's work together.
Right.
Yeah.
The tip of the spear.
Do we have compromise with you?
To that point, do we have the soundbite ready? Actually, let me ask the control room. At this point, one of the things we've been talking about is what the Senate's going to behave like under Mitch McConnell, majority leader, and how they're going to work with President Obama, and whether or not this is all about governing, which I think is nonsense to expect from this Republican Party. This is what Senator Ted Cruz of Texas said on Fox News tonight in terms of what is going to happen in the Senate now that it's under Republican control. Kumbaya, everybody.
Well, I think that is one of the biggest differences we're going to see with a Republican majority is finally meaningful oversight of the Obama administration from the U.S. Senate. For 6 years, Harry Reid has been President Obama's most important protector, and he shut down the Senate. There's been essentially no oversight. I hope we begin serious, careful, systematic, sober hearings examining executive abuse, regulatory abuse, lawlessness, abuse of power, whether it is the IRS wrongfully targeting citizens, whether it is the debacle of Benghazi and 4 Americans who lost their lives and why more was not done to save them, or whether it is the lawlessness that has pervaded Obamacare as the president and the executive branch has tried to pick and choose which laws to follow. I hope we see serious Senate oversight on all of those fronts.
I rest my case.
No, it's
okay?
not.
I rest my
That's
case.
him.
That's
this guy is bad news. He's Joe
Joni
McCarthy.
Ernst. It's
He's
Cory
Joe McCarthy. Let me just tell you, I'm just going to go through what he said there, which is really untrue.
Yep.
First of all, regulatory abuse to this guy means any regulation. Lawlessness, what's he talking about? Lawlessness, abuse of power. These are impeachable offenses. Where's this lawlessness coming from? What's this? Benghazi. The man makes these McCarthyite charges against everybody. This is what he does. I don't think he's typical. If I thought he was a typical politician, I'd give up paying attention to politics. I don't think that's what most politicians are. You guys sit around and say all Republicans are as bad as the worst Republicans.
No.
These are the worst.
This is what I'm saying. I'm saying that he will substantively call the shots in the direction the Senate chooses to behave because he has before, because he did with the shutdown, and now he's going to be running for president, which is going to give him even more incentive to, and it's going to give the other people like Rand Paul and people trying to outflank him and Marco Rubio also incentive to rush to the right.
You think they'll all be magnetized to the most extreme destructive position?
They're going to win a primary. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but that just seems like
speaking to Republican voters until for a long
time. Anyone of you, I mean, we're all trying to figure out the future. Does anyone here, we're just pundits, does anyone think that this man who we just heard can be the Republican nominee for president? Does anyone seriously believe
No, but I think
don't just put your hands in the air.
But
You think
Chris,
it's plausible?
Yes, I do believe it's plausible.
But Chris, I think he
plausible?
can.
Oh my God! You live the worst case scenario.
I think that he can shape how the nominee is chosen, and he could possibly be the nominee. But I think he can set the climate.
The narrative, that's exactly right.
Everybody's going to have to debate in his climate.
I mean, he was just
I think that's the problem.
I mean, he was just asked whether or not he supported Mitch McConnell for majority leader. He couldn't say yes.
Right. I'm going to blow your minds.
Let me go back to Howard. Howard, help me out here. Is it this bad? Am I surrounded by this bad news? Howard, is it this bad that Ted Cruz could be the nominee?
I'm going to break the tie here. I think it's a tie.
Blow our minds, Howard.
Okay, I think that Ted Cruz is Mitch McConnell's worst nightmare.
I think so.
Mitch McConnell's great night tonight is that he's now the majority leader. And by the way, let me also point out that Alaska matters and Louisiana matters because both Tom Daschle and George Mitchell, 2 former majority leaders that I spoke with tonight, said that there's more difference between 51 and 54 than just 3. Because if it's 51, as Lawrence O'Donnell was pointing out, any one senator, all prima donnas to begin with, any one senator can hold up the majority leader, imprison him or her. Yep. If they get that extra 3, that's going to make a big difference for McConnell. But even with that, McConnell's going to be presiding over a Senate in which there are at least 3 Republican presidential candidates: Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Marco Rubio, maybe even Rob Portman. The dynamics of this are going to be as follows. Ted Cruz is going to be grandstanding every minute of the day. He's going to be making life miserable for Mitch McConnell. Rand Paul has already told Mitch McConnell, I know this because Rand Paul told me this, that Rand Paul wants Mitch McConnell to try to do a deal on immigration. He's going to try to push and help and protect the flank of Mitch McConnell if he can on immigration. Would Paul be able to do that against Ted Cruz? I don't know. Mitch McConnell gave a very nice speech tonight about how he wants to prove to the president that he can be bipartisan. Mitch McConnell spent a whole career not being that way. Can he rise to the occasion? Will he take on the Ted Cruzes of the world? I think that's a huge question. And if I had to bet, I would say that McConnell will gingerly try to do it, and he'll have a confrontation with Ted Cruz early on. I don't know how it's going to come, but I predict that McConnell will do that. He may blow up the Senate in the process, which he certainly won't want to do, but he's not going to have any other choice. Otherwise, Ted Cruz is going to run circles around.
Who are you betting on? Are you betting on, you know these guys real well. Are you betting on McConnell being the guy we heard tonight, or the mad dog that just wanted to bring down the House, like Solomon a couple years, 6 years ago?
The irony of it is, Ted Cruz, by his obstreperousness and by his drive, may force McConnell, even against his will, to try to play more of the cohesive statesman, because that's the only answer to Ted Cruz. The only answer to Ted Cruz is to civilize the rest of the Senate, and that's the only way to do it. That's the only way to do it, and he'll probably have Marco Rubio and Rand Paul on his side as he does it. I mean, the Senate is going to be a fascinating theater of Republican presidential politics, with Mitch McConnell in a kind of ringmaster role that I don't think he ever anticipated.
May I jump in just for a moment here, because we have a new call to make. This is a governor's race in the great state of Hawaii, which previously had been too early to call. The interesting thing about this Hawaii governor's race is that Abercrombie had been the incumbent governor, Democratic governor in Hawaii. David Ige beat him by something like 30-something points in the Democratic primary in Hawaii, and then went on in the general election against Republican Duke Aona. This was not one that they knew was the Democrats were necessarily going to run off with, but NBC News now projects that David Ige, the Democrat, who President Obama did campaign for, Hawaii, home state, get it? And he will be the projected winner in the Hawaii governor's race. There's lots more ahead, including some outstanding races, including the Connecticut and Colorado governor's races. Alaska Senate and governor both too early to call right now. And as promised, I have something that will blow your minds. And I haven't been able to tell you yet, but I will in just a second. And I swear, if you don't look it up in the commercial break, it will blow your mind when we come back. Okay? Okay. Colorado. Steve Kornacki, what do we know about what's happening in Connecticut, and why is this still too close to call?
Yeah, well, let's take a look at it. So let's call it up on the screen, and then we can take a look at it. Here we go. So Dan Malloy, the embattled Democratic incumbent, now ahead by 17,000 votes. You still have plenty of votes that's outstanding, but the trend lately, if you've been following this the last few times we've gone to it, Malloy was behind. He made it even. Now he's pulled ahead. What's happened is the late vote here in Connecticut, the outstanding cities and towns, seem to be more Democratic than Republican. Malloy's been able to pull ahead. I can just read you a list right here of some of the places we've still yet to hear from. 2/3 of the city of Hartford, not reported yet.
Wow.
Norwalk, this is a big Democratic area. Half of the city of Stamford, down on Route 195. West Haven, right outside New Haven, overwhelmingly liberal Democratic area. So there's a lot of Malloy areas left out there. Malloy did not declare victory earlier, but he did speak to his supporters. He said he expected to be declaring victory soon. One number to keep in mind, this is a rematch. These two ran against each other in 2010. In 2010, this was one of the closest governor's races in the country. The final margin was 7,000 votes. You see, as we say, Malloy now up 17,000. So you start calling him Landslide Dan at this point if this holds up. I want to say one other thing, though, because we've looked at, tonight we've talked about New England. We have a Republican winning in Maine. We have a Republican in Massachusetts. We don't know exactly in Connecticut. I do want to say this as a son of southern New England. When we look at Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, and we say, oh, my goodness, the Democrats are struggling there. They've lost Massachusetts. I do want to point out this is the 5th time in 7 elections that a Republican has been elected governor of Massachusetts. If Dan Malloy holds on to Connecticut tonight, it is only the 2nd time in 7 elections that a Democrat's been elected governor of Connecticut. And tonight, with Gina Raimondo winning in Rhode Island, this is the 1st time since 1992 that a Democrat's been elected governor of Rhode Island. These are overwhelmingly Democratic states, and what that does in all of them is it creates an opening for Republicans to come in there, as Charlie Baker did in Massachusetts in this campaign, and say, let me be the chaperone. You gave the Democrats the legislature. You've given them everything else. Let me be the chaperone. It's a message that tends to resonate in these states. That's something to keep in mind as we talk about it.
Fascinating with that group of New England states, that you end up with these states that look so federally blue, but in terms of their governorships, they've been willing to go Republican over and over and over again.
Can I just say something about Dan Malloy? Yeah, I don't feel this way about a lot of politicians, but he strikes me as just a thoroughly decent guy.
That's what I think.
There's just something about him. He's governed the state. He did something that almost no governor did, was that he took a very progressive approach to the state's fiscal shortcomings. He raised taxes. He got hammered over it. He made sure that he wasn't cutting education funding, that he wasn't cutting teachers. It was risky. When all the other states were going the opposite direction, he went that way. He's been incredibly decent about the aftermath of Sandy Hook and gun control, and he just strikes me as a thoroughly decent individual.
I will say, actually, we had Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut on earlier as well, and after Sandy Hook happened, being able to talk to not just the representative specifically from Newtown, who's such an impressive representative. I'm forgetting her name right now at the moment. Chris Murphy as a senator there, Richard Blumenthal as a senator there, and in particular Dan Malloy as the governor there. All of them being able to speak to not just what was going on in their state, but how they needed to move forward in a way that just was very unifying. Yeah. I felt like Connecticut was well served by that at a time when they really needed to be.
Totally agree.
They were well served. We still don't know what's going to happen tonight in Connecticut at this point. Still too close to call, as is the Colorado governor's race, as is technically the Maine governor's race, still described by NBC News as too close to call, despite the fact that Paul LePage says he won. And Mike Michaud has said that Paul LePage won as well. Still that not settled. At this point, though, the big story of the night is that the Senate has moved into Republican control. Republicans picking up 7 seats. If you look at 6-year midterms that happen in a second-term president's second term, the average pickup for Senate seats by the party that is not in power, not in the White House, is 6 seats. That's the average since World War II in 6-year midterms. Republicans have bested that by 1. They've picked up 7 as opposed to the 6-seat average. We'll be right back.
Some folks still don't think I spend enough time with Congress. Why don't you get a drink with Mitch McConnell, they ask. Really? Why don't you get a drink with Mitch McConnell?
President Obama speaking last year at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Now that has a whole new feeling, doesn't it? Now that Republicans have become the majority party in the Senate, they get to pick the chairs of really consequential Senate committees. Here are a few Beltway predictions about who might get those plum jobs. As the most senior Republican on the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator John McCain is next in line to be chairman of Armed Services. North Carolina Senator Richard Burr, the ranking minority member of the Veterans Affairs Committee, he would likely assume that chairmanship. But he's also next in line over at the Intelligence Committee, so we'll see. The current Republican ranking member there is Senator Saxby Chambliss, but since Senator Chambliss is retiring this year, that means that Senator Burr's been floated as possible Intel chairman. Because the political gods have a sense of humor, longtime climate change denier Senator James Inhofe is reportedly up for the chairmanship of the Environment and Public Works Committee. We'll see if that committee keeps the word environment in its title if he gets to be the chairman. That would put him in charge of dealing with climate policy. And he's got interesting ideas on climate policy. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas is likely to be named chair of the subcommittee on science and space. So that opens up a host of possibilities for how partisan science and space can become in terms of Senate chairmanship.
I think the real hoot was environment.
Jim Inhofe?
That's a hoot. He doesn't believe in that stuff.
He says it's the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on mankind.
It's going to be a very slow-moving committee.
I love the idea. You know how
glacial even.
They change the names of the committee sometimes to reflect the sensibilities of the chairman or at least the membership. It is hard for me to believe that Senator Inhofe is going to be comfortable going to work as the chairman of a committee that has environment in its title.
You changed that E to extraction.
Extraction, right? Or dominion.
How is Ted Cruz going to be, I admit he can be creative. How's he going to use that science committee to attack Obama on Benghazi?
You never know.
He's going to find a way to wheedle it out there.
Figure it out.
In terms of, I want to thanks Ari for joining us as well. In terms of what's going to happen next and how the Senate, not just how the Senate functions, but how Washington functions, what the new dynamics are here at work. I mean, there's one level of this is happening textually when Mitch McConnell says what he is going to do. But then there's what everybody's reading into it in terms of what sort of incentives Mitch McConnell's going to have for his party, for the chances of his party taking over the White House, for his own longevity as majority leader. What kind of incentives are going to be driving him?
Well, I think, as we know, you have a huge dose of this. It's going to be politics. You mentioned the sort of creative novel-writing exercise of how do you fit Benghazi into anything, and there's a lot of that, but there certainly are places where policy matters. Alaska Senate race had a lot of talk about the fact that Murkowski would take over the oversight of the interior, which they care a lot about in that state. You look at someone like Senator McCain. He cares deeply about these as policy issues. He politics on them, too. But I think him getting back in what he considers a driver's seat to push foreign policy and Pentagon policy is important to him. But also, look, there is a burden to governing. And the question for some of these folks as they become chairman and chairwomen is, what are you going to do, particularly in the upper chamber, that goes beyond endless obstruction when we know the map changes? And one other point is, we've been talking about all these numbers. The numbers don't lie. The national favorabilities here on the parties are still really interesting. Yep. Democratic favorability, 43-54. Republican, 39-60. Unfavorable for Republicans in Congress. And your question about how do you run these committees, you keep going up from 60. That's not good for 2016. So, yes, we had a map tilted in all the ways we've covered. You also have, even in this midterm electorate, a lot of people saying at 60%, here, I'm voting for these guys, but I'm still not happy with what they've been up to in Congress.
I think absolutely. I mean, the Republicans I've talked to tonight have said they know that they have a mandate to govern. And if you think about the Republicans who won tonight, the thinkers in the party, the people who pushed these candidates that we saw win, they are the wing of the Republican Party who say, we have to govern. I mean, this is not the Tea Party wing that won these elections tonight. And I think I spoke earlier with Senator John McCain, who's expected, as you said, to take over the Armed Services Committee. And I think he has a couple top priorities. I think first and foremost, he wants to remove sequestration from the military. Now, whether, of course, Senator McConnell is very proud of what he did with the Budget Control Act that pushed that through. So I think there's some question marks about how that happens. And the second thing he wants to do
he wants to spend more money on defense.
He wants to spend more money on defense.
Or offense.
Restore the cuts. Look at readiness. I mean, look, we suddenly have all of these crises sort of unexpected. You have ISIS. You know, the military is not entirely prepared to fight that. And that's what I think McCain would say. I think he also wants to really dive into Iraq policy. I mean, one of the things he cares a lot about is Iraq and Syria. He says we've sort of abandoned those posts. So I think you can expect to see the Obama administration on defense on those issues.
You also have a situation where the big policy fights are all going to be about bills funding the government. I mean, because what's going to happen is they're going to use reconciliation to pass those approach bills, and they're going to put, because they control the amendment process, they're going to put stuff in there that they know are poison pills, that they know the president's not going to like. So Mitch McConnell has announced, we're going to go after the EPA regs on coal. We're going to do it, and we're going to give the president as a fait accompli this bill to fund the government that has within it defunding the EPA's regulatory oversight that they've announced, promulgating rules on coal-fired power plants. And now you, Mr. President, have a choice to veto this bill and do a shutdown of the government, or to sign it and take away one of your priorities. That's where the rubber's going to hit the road.
It's on the big approach. They're going to do that with Obamacare. They're going to do that with everything that they want to do.
But that's where the big fights will be, is on the big approach bills.
Also, to add to that, it's not necessarily appropriations, but on immigration, we talked a little bit about this earlier. I think, Democrats are going to be under a lot of pressure to accept an immigration bill that doesn't include a path to citizenship. I think that's one of the things where the president is going to have to decide if Republicans step up and they give them most of what they want, but they don't, include that one part which they, basically labeled amnesty in this campaign. I don't think that many of these
How would that
candidates
work,
can walk
though?
it back.
If you don't have a path to citizenship and you have tough new standards on hiring, you're forcing everybody to get illegal jobs illegally. I mean, there's not even, you can't even have the enforcement mechanism if people aren't allowed to sign in and become, public documented people here, right?
I mean, there's plenty of,
I don't know how that
arguments
works
back and forth
exactly.
of the policy.
I'm not even sure it functions that way.
That path to citizenship has become toxic in the Republican Party, and I don't see them going back on this at this point. And, I think that the president, I mean, you've heard sort of his aides behind the scenes and even some Democrats be kind of pragmatic about it. I mean, the advocacy groups are really the ones that have drawn this hard line.
But I think that reads the future into history, and I think politics is the opposite. It's the future. So you've got a 30-point gap spread here with Latinos going towards the Democratic Party, but only 8% of the electorate being Latino. We all know that changes next time. So I think it's the opposite. These guys can read the numbers, they read the polls, they know that share is growing, and they have to figure out how to warm up. Not necessarily through policy. There may be no immigration vote, but they certainly can't be this cold and this border security oriented if they want to do anything in the next cycle.
Yes, they can. They can, as long as they prevent anything from happening on immigration, so that Latinos continue to be frustrated with Democrats for not being able to get it done. If they can hold down Latino enthusiasm for Democrats, they know they're never going to win over the Latino vote. That's just not going to happen while any of us are alive, and Casey's only 14. Right. It's just never, ever going to happen. And so the incentive is to do nothing, and it will continue to be to do nothing for a very, very long time.
Which is why I think there's a strong political case the president should go big on whatever action he takes. And I think there's substantive reasons why it's legal under administrative law, and there's a lot of precedent about this. In fact, there's a lot of conservative and Republican immigration law professors who say he can do this. But from a political standpoint, right, it's the kind of fight you want to pick, I think. Yes. Precisely for the reason.
And they will try to impeach him if and when he does it. And that's the kind of fight that Democrats want to pick, too, honestly.
Don't forget that the immediate political future of the Republican Party is a GOP presidential primary. Yeah. That Ted Cruz is probably going to participate in.
I've heard about that. That's true.
That's a good thing. I will say one other thing to keep in mind here is that this President Obama, has issued 2 vetoes in total the entire time that he has been president. Does anybody remember what they are? No.
Water bill? No.
One of them, no, it wasn't even that. One of them was a typo in that the Congress passed a continuing resolution because they didn't think they were going to pass a spending bill, and then they passed the spending bill. So then they had both. They were redundant. And so President Obama vetoed one of them. Not exactly a landslide. The other one was literally a bill about notarizing your mortgage documents. Neither of the vetoes President Obama has issued have been things that even made the front section of the newspaper either time he did it. If he becomes the one Democratic bulwark in Washington against Republicans trying to pass all sorts of substantive legislation, the veto is going to become a much more exciting thing to cover.
And, where does that put Hillary Clinton in 2016? If President Obama becomes the sort of, symbol for stopping everything Republicans are trying to do, I mean, I think that's a potential problem. Unless she decides to run against it.
It's either a potential problem or it's a potential bonanza, depending on how people feel about what's being stopped. Yeah. All right, when we return, we're going to be asking Steve Kornacki what's going on in these 2 outstanding governor's races in Colorado and in Connecticut. Plus, we've got some interesting results from people who won re-election tonight despite multiple felony count indictments. Yay! We'll be right back.